Hey, the pickleball nets are up, Tom. It really feels like spring in Scarborough.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, John. Okay, I'm going to get started, I think. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Wednesday, March 17th, 2021 workshop of the Scarborough Town Council. The topic for today's workshop is the Growth Management Ordinance. We are scheduled to end at 7 o'clock sharp. Hopefully, if we do our job right, perhaps a couple minutes early just to give us a break, but we don't know for certain. Little quote at the top of the agenda. The workshop will be divided into 7 segments of equal length. Each segment will be led by a different counselor, and it's not permitted to run longer than 12 minutes. Everybody knows it's not necessarily my style to draw a hard line in the sand with timing, but I will on this. So it will end promptly at 12 minutes or earlier. The last minute of each segment will be for a straw poll of support or non-support. If the general concept is supported, staff will take it under advisement and start to outline some language. To be really clear, this is not us drafting language. I think if we walk away with some 3 to 5 overarching principles that we agree with, I think we've just moved the conversation forward. The genesis of this meeting is, I think Ordinance probably felt quasi stuck where they were. And I think this is me trying to just grease the wheels a little bit and just get us all talking as a body. If we have time, I have allowed for public comments. So if you're in the audience and would like to speak, hopefully I'll get to you at the end. And if I don't, we can carry it over to the into the meeting. I would say if it sounds a little bit cheesy, but if somebody's speaking of something and you agree, feel free to give them just the thumbs up or the 2 thumbs up so we don't all have to necessarily all talk and repeat the same stuff. I think the idea here is to figure out where do we have consensus. So we can show that by giving visual cues as well. So with that being said, the first segment number 1 is going to be led by Ken Johnson. He will be the chair for the next 12 minutes. And the topic will be the elimination of fractionalization and connecting growth permits to building permits. So with that, Mr. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Okay, I've got a timer. It's on. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find it. Believe me, this is nothing fancy dancy. This is just to keep me on track because you know me, I can ramble. Okay, so the topic is the fractionalization of growth permits, and what I thought we'd do is just step back for just a few minutes to track the history of a growth permit and how they got fractionalized. So again, like I said, nothing fancy dancy. Prior to 2001, the only means for growth management in the town was zoning. That's where things could be built. But as a result of the 2000 Growth and Services Review, there was a committee set up by the town council. The Growth Management Ordinance was adopted to manage the annual pace of residential, non-commercial residential growth using a set amount of growth permits. These permits were a 1-to-1 dwelling to permit. And at the time of this, the predominant housing types were single family and duplex. Multifamily, 1-bedroom weren't in the picture. Coach Lantern, Foxcroft, the Oaks, they had already been built out in the 80s, early 90s. So here is a little chart that came from, notice the numbers. There was a peak. I moved here in 84. And since I've been in town of Scarborough, growth has come up continuously over time. This is a nice little chart that shows from 84 into 99 when the Growth and Services plan started. And you can see we're peaking out at around 200. And again, most of these were single family and 1-bedroom homes, okay? Part of that Growth Services Committee was a survey, so to get the pulse of the community to see what they felt. And just a couple bullets here. We had a 39% response rate out of all the participants in the town. Every survey went out to every home. 75% of the community in the survey felt that the rate of growth was too fast. And among the survey respondents, people living in town more than 5 years, 85% thought the community was growing too fast. And here's a bullet that came out of the executive part of that committee that I still hold. To me, this is the way I think, that an active growth management does not mean trying to shut the door on future growth. It's merely trying to, for the ability of the town to provide necessary services and facilities for that growth. The vision of the future in the community was for the community to plan rather than to react, okay? So this is just a little tidbit that came out of that committee. Right here is where the GMO was formed. So from 2001 till we kind of sailed along. The market wasn't being driven by much growth anyway. But then in 2007, the zoning ordinance was updated to include fractionalization of unit sizes for net residential. And you can see this, we've all seen this and familiar, 1 bedroom under 750 square feet, 1/2 a unit, 2 bedroom less than 1,200 is 2/3 a unit, and a 3 bedroom or more is 1 permit. Corresponding 2008 update to the GMO tied that allocation strategy to the growth permits. So now instead of a 1-to-1, meaning 1 permit to 1 dwelling, it was fractionalized based on the type of house or the type of dwelling. And here's from Jay's, here's the fractionalization of the permits, 2008 amendments tied the growth permit formula to the residential density factors in the zoning. These factors only apply to units of 2-family, multifamily, and mixed-use buildings. And where are we now as a result of that? I'm 4.5 minutes into this. Is below shows you a graphic of the increase in residential development over time. The fractionalization and reserve pool that can also be refractionalized, that will be spoken by some other counselor, has changed our growth management policy to one of growth promotion policy while ignoring the premise of the GMO to preserve the character and ensure adequate facilities and services to the residents. Now that was a little editorial on my part, so I apologize. But this kind of shows the picture right here. Before we had the GMO that had a number of 135 residents to be built every year, we were singing right along, and the GMO had nothing to do with this. This was all market driven. But then you can see where we started bumping up in 2015, 2016. And here's the trend line right here. This is the 135. And when it was originally set, that 135 was residential dwellings. It wasn't by type, wasn't by 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, it was by dwellings each year. And as you can see, from 2015, big bump in 2017, 18, 19, and here we are in 2000, just finishing out 2020 at 242, which is well over 135. And I do believe we all are aware of what's on the plate and what's coming, which is, I do believe, is going to dwarf that 242. So here's a 5-year average of dwellings. So in the last 5 years, we've had 1,305 new dwellings built in the town of Scarborough. Just imagine that, it's 261 a year, not 135. So my recommendations, or I think a topic of discussion, is to restore the initial intent of 1 growth permit to 1 dwelling, regardless of the type. Remove the zoning references of dwelling definition from the GMO and have the GMO stand alone. Establish a policy to manage growth and plan growth versus reacting to growth. And refine the growth permit distribution to developers, which is a separate discussion. So that is my little presentation, and it can be open for discussion. Any thoughts? Anybody object? Jean Marie, I'm the chair. I call on you.
Thanks. One thing that I probably may bring up when I'm talking about growth but is the type of growth that brings the most money or income to town is our multifamilies and condos. So what will be the effect of fractionalization on the ability to develop those, particularly in growth areas where we want them?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not pretending to have the answers. I'm looking at this as the pure intent of our growth management ordinance, right? I know the focus became schools, and we're trying to mitigate the impact on the schools, which was associated with 3-bedroom home styles. But for every dwelling that's built in a house, there are people that live in the house. People drive cars, they use the libraries, they use the roads, they call 911, they use our beaches. I mean, 135 doesn't necessarily have to be. We can find a sweet spot number in there and just manage to that number. And then I think we should come up with policies to then take care of the special occasion. Like if a project is going to come over that maybe should not pull from the reserve pool, and come up with a policy on how to address those. That's, I think, a need for a broader discussion. Yes, John.
I was just going to add, Ken, I'm supportive of removing fractionalization and just trying to make it easier to understand how we're distributing these so that we have a way to, really do good comparisons. So I'm supportive of that. And then the other item that I think you are going to discuss a little bit, or that we're discussing in your section, is around making sure that the building permits are tied to growth permits, I think.
Yes.
And I feel like that's also a very reasonable step to take forward too, to consider how do we do that. So I just want to say I'm supportive of both of those policy approaches.
Yeah, and I apologize. I look at that as implied. One growth permit equals one dwelling, which is the building permit gotten from our planning. Yes, Betsy.
Yeah, that was a very helpful presentation. Thank you, Ken, very much, and for all the time you've spent on this. I
2 minutes.
definitely support what you're saying about the fractionalization. I did see, and it wasn't really a bullet item, but it was policy directive 1. So I'm not sure exactly where this might come up, but have you given thought to some of the things we receive that some of the other towns are doing, so that, we would literally have, a number of permits for, say, a multifamily apartment house with more than 35 units, we would say there can be, make some number up. There can be 5, there can be 100 built, I'm
Right.
just making up. And then, so many subsidized housing units, so many single family homes. Have you given any thought to that?
I think, again, I think that's probably more of a deeper dive with the group when we get down to that level. But the state of Maine statutes allows us to do just that. We can allocate X amount of permits for different areas and different types. That's within our purview of doing it. But I really think, because over the fractionalization, and again, we'll get in the reserve pool, whoever's got that, it's just the intent of the GMO it went away. I've heard developers say on the record, and rightfully so, our GMO is worthless. Matter of fact, we may even address something later on the council about, again, letting people build. We're beyond the GMO, but we're gonna do it. But that could be a different discussion. Mr. Clucci.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Betsy said. And John, I can support eliminating fractionalization. And I did think it makes a lot of sense to tie the growth permit to the building permit. Where I think I wanted to echo what Betsy was saying is that I think we should identify categories for these permits. And I think part of what is kind of buried in your numbers is the trend recently to build apartments in town and condos or smaller units, which are really different than, in terms of impact on the schools anyways, than single family homes. Right. So I guess what I'm kind of picturing is maybe it's 90 or 100. I think we've been building about 90 single family homes for a while. And that's pretty stable. Right. Where the tick up has been is we've introduced a lot of apartments recently. And I think we could manage them separately and be a lot more clear in our ordinance
Correct.
in that way, instead of trying to calculate 2/3 of a unit, which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Don, you get the last word, and then we're taking a quick thumbs up, thumbs down. So Don, you get 30 seconds because we're 30 seconds over time.
Yeah, it's really, I support everything that's been said. I think this is a smart move. I think it'll address the problem that, may have been created when we implemented that particular feature. But Ken, generally, do you have any concerns about any, if we do this, any sort of unforeseen circumstances or creating issues of another kind by doing this? Any downside?
I don't. I think we can address the outliers with policy. I like the concept that John and the chair brought forward on the counselor permits. Tighten that up, come up with a criteria, and I really think that would do it. But again, to manage that just level set amount of growth, and then of course the exceptions comes before the council. We make the decision if there's a benefit to the town. If there's not a benefit to the town, we say, sorry, not this year, come back next year.
Great.
That's what.
One thing I also want to add, I think that makes a lot of sense, ton of sense. I like the simplicity of this. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and say that there is general support for eliminating fractionalization and connecting growth permits to building permits. I think that's fair from that conversation. We're not stating anything other than that, right? We don't know how that interacts with anything. Nobody's making any claims, but I'm hearing for simplicity purposes, everybody's nodding their head. So with that, Councilor Clucci, the floor is yours. And your topic is exploring transfer of development rights, an easy topic.
Yeah. So
I
I like to try to shake down every possible avenue, and this is one that came up in our Conservation Commission meeting. We have a program today where if you're in a high growth area, you can purchase development rights from a rural area in town and get a bonus density in where you're trying to build. The programs had very limited use or success, I'd say. And I think, part of that's probably because there isn't much incentive there. And in thinking about, that fact that, as we're growing in our growth areas, we really should be trying to ramp up our conservation in the rest of town. I was wondering if there's a tie-in that we could explore with the GMO where, there's some exceptions to the GMO for contract zones, a number of categories. But if there could be an exception for if you've paid the in lieu fee for transfer of development rights. And what I don't like about transfer of development rights is it drives up the cost of the homes that you're building, right? Because you're paying a fee. But we have a lot of expensive homes in town. So I think that's probably okay for some of the units that are built here. But I also want to allow lower or more affordable units to be built and to still have it be profitable for the developer. So I was wondering if maybe there could be a kick-in where, instead of just getting 1.5 times your density, maybe you get 1.5 times your density for single family, but then you can also build 20 apartments. Or I don't know what the right ratio is, but that was the idea that I was looking to explore. It might be too complicated for what we're talking about, but that's the concept. Go ahead, Ken.
How many of those fabulous transfers have we done? You actually did it. How many have we done? Do you know?
I don't. Jay said that we haven't done any actual transfers. We've done a couple where they paid the in lieu fee.
Yeah, one that I'm aware of.
Or one. Okay.
So maybe just as a thought is maybe we should just do away with it. I think it just adds to the complexity of our policies of growth in the town. I mean, because I was waiting for your explanation of what it really was, because I've read it in the zoning. It's probably the biggest chunk in the zoning ordinance.
In the zoning, it's very complicated.
4 pages. And I can see Jay even shaking sometimes, frightful that somebody's going to ask him to explain. And Jay knows his stuff.
So did I not explain it? Well, it's basically, if you're in a high growth area, you can pay a fee and that'll give you bonus density. And that fee will either go into a fund that will be used to conserve land elsewhere in town, or it could be a direct transfer too. You could find a partner that, lives out by Broadturn Farm and say they could deed away their rights to develop that plot of land, and you get that density or bonus density where you're trying to build.
Gotcha.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just so you're aware, there's a kind of a competing priority, if you will. There's a similar density bonus for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And that's been taken advantage of more so than has the development transfer. I don't know why. There used to be a differential in cost to the developer. I think that was part of the reason, but I think we've aligned those now so that the same dollar amount, but for whatever reason, the affordable housing one has been used more.
It's a good point. I don't know that I'm an advocate for this, Ken. It was an idea that I had that I wanted to further explore and at least bring it to the council's attention. Go ahead, Betsy.
I think, when I was looking at this, one of the advantages to doing something is that in this arena is that it puts, folks on an even playing field for the value of their property when you do decide to zone, say for conservation, or because if you own property and you planned on developing it, and then we as a town say, this really needs to be rezoned so that that's not going to happen now. Your value of your property just goes down at that point, depending. So in some places it has been used to help even out the priorities that you want to have in town, in different areas of town, while at the same time focusing on your growth areas. I think that danger is too strong of a word, but I think, some of the considerations is if you don't control those growth areas and all at once you're pushing all of your growth into these areas, and then they become, very dense, lots of traffic. And, so, you're kind of making things like that. I guess to give my opinion on it, I think it's worth, what Ken said is it's very complicated the way we have it laid out now, but I do think it's worth exploring a little more in depth.
Okay. So that's all I have. If I actually, I do want to share my screen. Just I don't want to be shown up by Ken. And you set a good precedent there, Ken.
Fancy dancy.
When we're talking about units, this graph on the right here is my calculation of how many units we've built by decade. And the brown is residential units and the green is commercial, which would be your apartments or assisted living. So this is 2010s, 2000, 1990s, 80s. So it gives you a little longer term perspective. And we're not out of whack this decade relative to the past three. We did see a tick up, but I want to drill into residential. No, sorry, I did the wrong order. If I just come down to residential this decade, what was striking to me is we were building 50 a year at the beginning of the decade. Remember, there was a recession there.
Right.
And then it's really creeped up. But then the past couple of years, it's really gone down substantially. And I think a big part of the reason is probably because our growth permits have been taken up by the apartments or condos that have come in town. But go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, see, I just get perplexed how we divide the two. I guess residential is defined as a 3-bedroom home and everything else is commercial.
These are single family, not regardless of bedrooms. And these are in multifamily.
Okay.
And this is the now green is the commercial. So in construction year 2019, 300
houses, right? And the rentals. Right?
What's that?
The commercial is also the multifamily that's.
It's all multifamily.
Okay.
Yeah, rentals and I have assisted living in here as well, but there hasn't been much of that lately.
So for 2019, well over 300.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then for single family homes, only 84.
Yep.
And 2020 is a partial year for my data, just so you know. So this isn't a finished number. And that's all I've got.
Well, you got 4 minutes left.
Hey,
Oh, I can steal them back. I can steal them back. 'Cause
Yes,
we
I'll
ran
bank
over
it.
yours. Yeah.
It's just
But-
worth, I think it's worth noting though, that big spike in 18, 19, really in 19, those were what I would think you'd characterize now as council permitted, right? That was the beacon. That was a conscious contract zone decision. Project came forward and they were allowed to grab, actually the council at the time replenished the reserve pool and allowed them to grab from there. And that's what enabled that project and that spike.
and that's 300 units almost right there.
288, yep.
I hate to pull chair on the chair, but we're running amok we're getting Johnson fired up and we're running amok of the actual agenda item.
I'll
Got
take
So I am going to close this segment. How's that sound? I'm not messing around today. And is there a general consensus to explore this further? And there's a general agreement that it's confusing the way it's written and convoluted, but the idea and practice, we would like to dive into it some more, or am I saying something that is? Jean Marie says, "Okay, I'll put my thumb up." So it's kind of a nothing agenda item, I guess is fair, right? We don't know where we are with it. So let's put that one's in the parking lot. Let's put it that way with a semi-favorable reaction there. Mr. Anderson, you are next. The amount of permits for single-family homes in the annual allocation and multi-unit growth strategy. And I'll let you run with that whatever way you seem fit. So I apologize for such a general topic.
Yeah, so I'll share my screen since we're all sharing screens. And again, this is more how I kind of digested that question, which might not be how everybody else was thinking about it. But I think it goes back to what John and Betsy were saying earlier about, especially if we get rid of fractionalization, how do we want to maybe categorize things a little bit and at what level to set some growth targets for permitting. So let me see. You guys see my screen?
Yep.
So again, the first question I kind of asked myself, and it cuts across all of these areas, is how much growth do we really want to see for the different types of housing? And so I think we could make the decision that we continue to support, that we retain the state minimum focus on the number of permits / the historical pace, because I think if you consider the reserve pool and everything, it really kind of goes above the historical minimum. And so are there certain areas though where we want to see a faster pace, or do we want to keep it at a minimum from what we see historically? And then when we think of type of housing, how do we want to focus the pace there? Because we have single family versus multifamily. We have, what I'm calling, the market housing versus the affordable versus other types of housing. And we've talked a lot recently about entry workforce level housing, and senior housing as a key area. So again, what are the types of housing we would want to consider? And then where do we want that type of growth targeted? Do we want it in the low growth areas and the high growth areas? So again, I just kind of made this grid as a way for myself to kind of think about all of these. Not that this is where we need to go, but just to show like we can kind of look at these, categorize them, and decide how we want to set targets potentially from the pool to incentivize certain types of growth or certain types of dwellings versus others. So again, like from a low density perspective, what do we want to do about single family, and where does affordability come into play, and where do we want to locate it? Same thing from a multifamily perspective. Do we want to do anything around trying to push it to a certain zone or limit it in a certain zone, just to make sure that again we're being targeted and planful in our growth. So again, this is just kind of how I was thinking about it. I don't know if this is what everybody else was thinking, but it's just trying to make sure we're being thoughtful of, especially if we get rid of fractionalization, and depending on what we do with the reserve pool, how do we make sure we support the right type of growth in the right areas at the right pace? I don't see everybody, but anybody have any questions? Betsy?
Yeah, so I've been thinking, obviously a lot about this type of plan. And I think one thing that might be of value is to have, I think to further define affordability, I think in terms of affordable housing, that, taking out income restricted housing, which is what is brought in front of us a lot, and also that we may provide tax incentives for. Or, you could call it subsidized if you want to say, because it's subsidized by the state, sometimes the federal government, subsidized or income restricted housing. And then I think affordable housing, in my mind, is a lot about what this whole GMO is about, right? Because that's going to be about supply and demand. And so if we, how much the developers are going to supply and how much demand is there is going to drive, the price of housing and rents, all of it. So I think when we, when we look at affordability, certainly looking at the supply is going to be important. But I think in market, the market is, it's driven by, probably at least three factors. And as we look at whatever we lay out, I think I'm going to suggest within the reserve pool discussion that we do review this annually. I think even every 3 years is too long. I'm thinking automatic pilot, doesn't work because there's factors that change. And the best shot we have at keeping housing affordable, I think, is to make sure we're looking at, as a council, market factors, interest rates, and what people want to live in.
Paul?
Yeah, I think, since we all have, it appears there's a strong consensus to eliminate fractionalization. Well, with that complicates things, because now we have to really come up with what is, particularly our multi-unit growth strategy, and how is that going to happen, right? Because there's two ways to do it. We can look at it and say, okay, we're going to make one-to-one permits. There's going to be 265 of them, because that's, it was close to 265 that Councilor Johnson put up. That's one way to do it. But if we did it that way, I would suggest that, there's evidence to suggest the current GMO is working the way it was intended to. In fact, there's strong evidence to suggest that, right? So I think the question is, if we do this simplification, are we actually going to, we better have some really good policies around it, is I guess my point. So I'll leave it at that, because I'm with you, John. I don't know what conclusions out of this segment, but I think it's worth, you have very good questions to think about. So
Yeah, I think sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Well, I definitely have a different take on this. I really don't think it's the purview of this council to be social engineering this town, okay? The GMO is a pace of growth. The market drives what that growth is, okay? Because that's going to change over time. And what's happened over time in our GMO is, because the market changes and we want to capture as much of it as we can, we've started fractionalizing, reserve pooling, and everything. That's not a policy. That, again, that's promoting growth. So if we all just want to promote growth, I wish we'd just be real honest and say, we want to promote growth. We've got no business social engineering this town. That's my 2 cents on that topic.
Jean Marie? And then Don?
I was going to say Dawn's hand was up before.
Oh, sorry. I saw you first.
Oh, okay. I was
Sorry.
just going to say, as I'm sitting here listening to all of you, and I, again, in my section, one of the things I do want people to think about is I would like to see us bring in a consultant, to be honest with you. If we're going to rewrite this GMO, we need to bring in a third neutral party who knows what the heck they're talking about, because otherwise we're going to have a lot of potentially unforeseen circumstances. So that's all I wanted to say right now, to plant that thought in people's heads.
Mhm. Don?
Yeah, I agree with Jean Marie's suggestion about getting help, particularly to do a baseline so we can do a proper needs analysis. And I'll touch on this in a little more detail in my segment as well. Without understanding where we are and what our mix is and where we want it to go, we're really just going to be taking pot shots at this. So I would just, make that point. The other thing is I would say, back to what Councilor Ken Johnson had to say about social engineering. Well, to be fair, if we're going to take any position on affordable housing, that is, I think, by definition, social engineering to some extent. So there will be questions about how much of that we want to embrace and how far we want to go with it. But I agree with what he also has to say about the market, defining what we need. The problem is at the moment, the market's not really working like a normal market. We're really out of whack in terms of the supply side. So I'll just leave it at that.
And
Yeah, I'll end it with this. Social engineering may have been a little too strong. I'll pull that back. Okay. But if you go to Zillow right now at the Downs, there's 30, 40, 50 homes right now for sale that are all affordable. They're right around 239, which at 3% interest rate, that's affordable by any.
Don't be looking at Zillow. They're notoriously incorrect with numbers.
Okay.
And the
I'll go to your
Downs, most
website.
of them are, yeah,
Right
go to my
information.
website, call me, I'll get you the real story, okay? But no, I mean, there are so-called more affordable in there, but it's also because of the layout of them. They're the condos, they're smaller square footage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's correct.
And most of them go under contract like boom. So
But they are available. So it's not that Scarborough doesn't have affordable housing. If you have,
they're not available. They're under
I want to live
contract.
on Crouch Neck for $250,000. That's really not an issue for this town council to discuss.
Oh, yeah,
Housing.
Yeah.
Paul?
Councilor Johnson keeps making lots of arguments to repeal the GMO altogether. Because if we're concerned about not social, first we're saying the market should drive these things, and we shouldn't be social engineering. That plus that equals repeal the GMO in my head.
GMO, because everybody keeps losing the focus of the GMO. Clearly stated in Maine state statute, it's the pace of growth. Does anybody need the definition of pace of growth? It's
okay.
The amount of growth year over.
I apologize for taking the bait. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
I just would want to add that, I agree more with Don in terms of like not social engineering, but like being planful and thoughtful of the type of growth that we want to promote within the town, which maybe my grid was too in the weeds, but I do think that we have to decide, especially if we get rid of the fractionalization, where do we want to incentivize certain growth? And I would still argue, like, while can I agree that there is, affordable housing because you can get a condo for $280 in a brand new building, but that doesn't mean that there's, essentially affordable single family housing with a yard around that same price, kind of like the manufactured housing at Hillcrest potentially. Like, to me, it's also different types of housing that we want to make sure are available and affordable. So I think that's part of where I think government comes into play, is to like help make sure we're considering all stakeholders and all needs, not just letting the market tell people, well, if you want to own property, then you're kind of limited to owning a 2-bedroom, 800 square foot condo, which really might not be what people want when they think of property ownership. Ken, then John, then.
This will be the last thing. We have a clause in our policies that allow developers to opt out of their obligation of building 10% affordable in a new development. You want to take care of affordable housing, we stop that. And if they don't want to do it, we tell them to go somewhere else and build.
Or charge them more as an in lieu fee, way more, like
Okay,
Portland
John.
does.
No.
And then Betsy.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea, but it's beyond the scope of what I can cover right now. Our GMO and our ordinances have gotten us to a pretty good place in Scarborough. We're a very desirable community. One of the gaps that I see, and I think this gets to what you were talking about, John, in terms of trying to, fill some of the holes that our current process and ordinances have created, is if you graduate from high school here, you go to college, it's almost impossible for you to come back and live in Scarborough and start your career. I'd like to see if we can fix that somehow. And maybe there's policies that can help that. I don't know. But I'd like some, maybe it's a consultant can help us get there, but we're a rapidly aging community and yeah, so I'm done.
Paul, can I just correct one thing? I'm not trying to be argumentative, but the Crossroads district is the only district that has the 10% requirement. No other district requires affordable housing.
Thanks, Tom. Betsy?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, I think, that point that Ken brought up is definitely not, we don't have time to discuss that because there's a lot of pluses and minuses to that. And especially the way we've rolled it out, it's got great intent, but I'm not sure that it achieves what we're hoping to achieve exactly. So that's just that comment. And I lost the actual topic here that we were talking about, but I am in favor of maybe not necessarily the exact list that John showed, but to start looking at categories, because we say we don't social engineer, but we do a comp plan. And the comp plan is a vision of what we want the town to look at. And a GMO, we've all said, needs to back up what the comp plan does in certain ways. So, we are at a point in time in Maine in general, I think, where towns are doing a lot more planning and being more thoughtful about what they want to look like and how they want to have their character be. And I just think it's a factor of that.
So John, I'm going to wrap this up. Do you want the last word, or are we all set?
Yeah, I was just gonna wrap it up, and that I think the best thing to do from this conversation is what Jean Marie recommended, because I think this is a complex, this could become complex, and I think getting a third party to potentially come in and help with this particular topic, if it's something we pursue, I think is going to be the best path forward. So I think that's just how I would close this one out.
And frankly, I think that's really the only decision point. I think there's a lot of good general discussion. Is there a general consensus that we could use a third party set of eyes on this? All right, that's 5 of us. So we'll take that. And that's not something that, obviously that will be something we kind of mull over again and discuss. So
Mr. Chair, if I could just quickly interject, when I say third party, I don't want to spend a lot of money per se on it. But what we should be looking at is Greater Portland Council of Governments or MMA and see who or what they may offer. And I can see I see Tom thinking about this down there.
No, I was thinking about tapping to the resources we already pay for, essentially. So, Mr. Hamill, with that, you have another, by the way, great discussion. I know that was super broad, so well done, John, for such a super broad topic. Mr. Hamill, specific mechanisms to encourage, kind of in a continuation, so this is good, specific mechanisms to encourage home ownership and median income affordability. So go ahead, Mr. Hamill.
So we're going to move then from very theoretical to really specific mechanisms. So I'm going to try to start by just holding back a little bit on that. And I don't want to be outdone by others who've actually had numbers. But I did check to see that as of August 2020, we had something in the neighborhood of 453 affordable housing units in Scarborough. So, 30% of them were approved but not built as of that time. That included Jocelyn Place, Bessie Commons 2, for example, and 42% of them were senior. There were no units identified at that time as workforce affordable housing units. And I'll go through in a moment and talk about the definition for workforce affordable. But there are several forces that have combined to draw attention to the issue of housing affordability for rental and ownership. So our biggest challenge, I feel, is for us to define the problem statement. We touched on this a little bit in some of the prior discussions. It's going to require we look at the data, we try to be analytical in the approach, that probably music to many people's ears, and be fact-based in developing recommendations and in our general decision-making. For now, we'll take a brief look at some of the local issues and approaches. One caveat I want to make, we are in a period of tremendous chaos and uncertainty, and the markets are not functioning as normal. Whether or not they will return to normal, I don't know, but I don't expect that this period, will last indefinitely. The issues of affordability and ownership have been driven by housing inventory demand, rapidly rising housing prices, labor shortages, materials costs, a bunch of things. and they've been compounded by other factors. Boomers, folks like me, and older, we're sitting tight. We're not doing what we normally would do, and that would be move out of our houses or move into something smaller. So we're not, that inventory is not being added to the supply side. And in this, this is all from a recent article, and I'll send you the site from New York Times. Where have all the houses gone? In the same article, they talk about 4 million homeowners had government-backed loans with mortgage forbearance, which was suspended during the pandemic. But there are still 2.6 million homeowners who, are living in houses that would otherwise be returned to the market through foreclosures. So what I've tried to do in this just brief setup is to look at local areas who've had big housing affordability issues and have had more experience than we have had dealing with the issue, mainly Portland, Biddeford, Saco, a few other examples. Portland's taken a big step. They had a 2015 approach. They have an affordable housing ordinance. I know that we have zoning ordinances and so forth, but not really a housing affordability ordinance per se. They've used recent mechanisms that range from most recently an 18-story apartment building. They're talking about putting in the West End in Portland for rent and for ownership. They've also talked about the concept of tiny homes, expanding the building envelopes on individual properties. That's also called hyperlocal zoning, where you change the zoning rules to allow, more homes on land that maybe at one time only permitted one. You could put 4 there. So most of those ideas flow from major metropolitan areas. Everyone's heard of the term NIMBY. The term that's used to refer to issues like this is called YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. The folks that are very progressive, and believe in really driving public approaches to solving housing affordability, can be considered, YIMBY proponents. So I want to just take a minute to talk about workforce housing. What is it? And this is also drawn from Portland, but they've defined workforce housing as units that will comply with certain pricing limits. They typically also have deed restrictions. So if you buy something, you can't sell it within 99 years. They have features like that. But they define a workforce rental unit. That's housing affordable to a household earning up to 100% of the AMI, the area median income. And then rent increases for that unit were limited also by deed restrictions and lease agreements. They also have a workforce home ownership unit, and that's for housing for which the purchase price is affordable to a household earning 120% of the AMI. So I don't know, how those numbers would differ for us in Scarborough versus Portland. And then the general theme for affordable is it shouldn't exceed 30% of a household's gross income. And then low income housing typically is 80% of AMI. So the one other data point I'd like to share with you, an anecdote, is that Portland has also gone to the trouble of looking at available parcels. Where can we build affordable housing? And they own something. They did this as part of their new comp plan, Portland's Plan 2030, and through a review of 550 parcels, they concluded that only 3 of them were suitable for building affordable housing. One was a municipal parking lot, and the other was in the land trust preserve. So we don't really have those issues in Scarborough, but the issues of us conflicting with land trust and other needs, is a real one. So where does that lead us in terms of other approaches? In Biddeford, they focused on concentration areas in the Mill District downtown and in their business and industrial parks. They've been very focused on trying to increase density in areas that are also close to transit hubs. They've had very good success with that. I think we learned from our recent GP COGS meeting of how that's really helping to drive activity and growth in that town. They also have different housing stock. They have older stock, mill buildings and that sort of thing. So they are very focused on redeveloping existing structures, doing rehabs, condo conversions and developments, and they require density bonuses of a residential unit for every certain every certain amount of square footage that is built and developed. So those are, that's a sort of a quick rambling list of measures and mechanisms that we could draw from. I think that our approach here is really to try to, rather than jumping to one and pushing tactical measures, I think that our challenge will really be to update our analysis of housing supply and demand. What does it look like today of all types, by types of and prices and affordability. Identify the specific issues that we have. Where are they in terms of the price points, and also where are they geographically within town, and then to develop policy from that point in terms of adopting specific measures. So I'm not at this point recommending that we do X, Y, and Z. I'm recommending, in contrast, a different approach to this that might take us at a different path and a different pace. And go ahead, Betsy.
Okay, yeah. Yes, one takeaway I take from what you're saying is the idea of the inventory. I would like to know where these $250,000 condos are that Ken is referring to, because when I look on the internet, the $1,700 square foot single families in the Downs are going for $465. The one that we put in as affordable housing, that we put in under that program is about to sell for close to 300. So, and that's with a restriction on it. So I would like to see that, but I think that inventory would be really important. I don't know if we can gauge someone for that. And I think, in terms of a third party, I just want to say, because we've kind of talked about this, I think, we have to make sure we don't choose someone with a mission or an agenda, and that they would take Scarborough values into account, as defined by this council. Like GP-COG, they're outstanding, great people. They do a great job, but they do have a mission. They make it clear all the time. They just got $350,000, for of CARES money to look at transportation and multi-housing units close to transportation for the quote unquote metro area. They do talk about the metro area quite a bit. I am not at the place, and perhaps I could be convinced, where I consider Scarborough the metro, part of a quote unquote metro area. We are a town that is juxtaposed to Portland. So I really support what you said, Don, about starting to get more data about inventory and prices and things like that. Even just knowing how much senior income subsidized housing we have, and even having a list of, what that looks like. I think that would be a good place to start in terms of who we engage for more work. I think, we definitely want to pick someone as neutral as possible that would help us craft something around our vision, not the other way around.
Thank you. Paul.
Betsy, those are the good points. I agree with a lot of that. One of the things I would also like to know is, just comparatively speaking, how, I know we're making decisions for Scarborough, but I'm interested on how we are with the surrounding communities, right? For instance, we've created a ton of senior affordable housing, and we hear all the time how much it's a need. I'm curious on where we are to our surrounding communities. Are we, I don't want to call that a burden, right? But are we doing our part? I feel like we're probably doing more than our part recently. I could be completely wrong, but that's something else. But I think, Don, what this ultimately speaks to is pretty much what the last segment did, is, can we get somebody in here that helps us explore this a little bit more? So
yep.
I'll leave that alone.
Great. Any other comments or questions? I had, one kind of closing comment. Go ahead, Sean. Thanks.
Yeah, I just, looking at the current GMO, we do kind of make some allowances where affordability is there. And so again, I think that's a theme I would like to see continue in this next one. Again, that's assuming we have a reserve pool. So if we move away from that, then the question becomes, without a reserve pool, what are the other mechanisms we have in place around affordability to drive and make sure we're allocating or incentivizing affordability to some extent. So I'm supportive of that in there somehow, but whatever that is, I think is going to be dependent on what the final GMO looks like.
Great, thanks, John. There is, Tom, go ahead.
Can I
Thank you.
just offer a comment based on my experience? I've had the pleasure of being the staff support to the Scarborough Housing Alliance since I've been here. So I really appreciated that time. From my perspective, affordability is a vexing problem, and you can't leave it to market to solve it. They won't solve it, frankly. And so there's three methods to achieve affordability. Either you require it through an ordinance and an inclusionary zoning. You somehow incentivize it so it makes sense from the developer's perspective, or you heavily subsidize it. And it's a combination of those three strategies that will produce tangible results. The market will not do it on its own.
Don,
Thanks, John.
oh, sorry, Don, segment's up. So you want to do your last word? I'll move to.
No, go ahead. If you had a comment, but then I just had two other points to make, but I did want to build on what Tom just said, and that is, yeah, those definitely are the things we need to look at doing. Implicit with that, though, is sort of like what kind of commitment are we making to that in terms of theory, in terms of strategy, and that's, I think, easy to do, and it's easy to sign up for. I think it's really hard to execute, and I think the downhill slope could be pretty slippery if we find out we're moving too fast or we're going in the wrong direction. So my appeal there is that there was a guy that Chip Newell, who was quoted recently. He's a developer in Portland, and he pointed to things like rent control, Green New Deal measures, other things like that are driving up costs and put market rate housing out of reach of most buyers. So additional requirements, including things like inclusionary rezoning or some of the things that have been mentioned, we run the risk of having that make the production of rental and for sale, multifamily units, virtually impossible. We run the risk of it actually, developers will not do it anymore. They'll come to, they'll move out of certain areas looking for other places to do that. So the final thing I'd say, and this is probably the biggest missing part of my whole segment here, at one time, and I can't really name the time exactly, but we were talking about, and I think that Barry Tibbetts touched on this briefly in his letter to us, and that was the idea of continuity of families, and a number of people have talked about that theme. How do our kids, live here if they want to live here and have their families grow up here? How, somebody called me the other day, their daughter's a teacher. She's looking for a place to live in Scarborough. Forget about buy, where would that be? And so I think that that group we have not really, addressed adequately. And the group of, elder folks that maybe want to stay in their homes and not downsize, and, the tax burden is growing and it forces them to do that. There are some very, very advanced approaches that have been tried in certain localities where you end up addressing the tax burden upon settlement of the estate at some point in time. We really absolutely have nothing at all to say about that affordability demographic in our town. So.
All right, Don, I'm gonna move on because we're 8 minutes over. So with that, I'm going. I am going.
Oh, in my segment? Wow, that's bad.
Now we're 8 minutes and 20 seconds over, Don. All right, so now. Jean Marie is creating a path forward for projects in designated high growth areas. Go ahead, Jean Marie.
Yeah, well, here we go. Talk about market forces. Paul has something to share for me. I just asked Jay very quickly to get me some numbers of things that are currently in the pipeline, so to speak. And now remember, keep your brain just in the growth areas. not in my side of Scarborough, not in the beaches, but in the growth areas. And you notice we've got 485 units so-called approved. These are approved projects. Project sites are active, but construction is not started on buildings. These roughly 210 are multifamily, 235, and that doesn't mean 210 multifamily buildings, okay? That's units. 235 are single family duplex units. Not included in the number are 189 multifamily units, excuse me, currently being built but not yet occupied, of which 79 are for seniors. So the reason I wanted to throw that up there for you folks, because I know that one of the things that we are facing is, what do? We have our growth management ordinance. We have a comprehensive plan. We have certain designated growth areas. We've got builders ready to roll. We've got builders who are rolling now. There are those who would say, let them build. Just let them build. I mean, because the market will take care of it. And I'm looking at Ken while I say that, that the market would potentially take care of it. I did talk to Rocky. I figured I'd call him and say, look, if you didn't have any limits on building single family, and again, this is not cast in stone. This is nothing Scarborough Downs is saying they're going to do. So I don't want anybody flipping out on me. But they could potentially, build 100 to 150 single family houses in a year. Of course, restrictions are building materials, crews, being able to find the crews, the subs and whatever to put a house together. So they could do that. So just a couple things that I wanted to point out to you folks that I learned this week. I never thought about this. I went to a presentation that the library's doing, that the year my daughter was born, 1991, there were 12,000 people in Scarborough, more or less, and that's now doubled over time. But what's interesting when you look at thank you, John, for doing your graphs. It shows though that, the GMO was somewhat successful in keeping things, at a pretty level, controlled growth. And what I think is fascinating, and I need to do some more research on it, is actually school numbers didn't particularly increase over all that time, more or less. Okay. So put that aside. That's a separate thing that also needs to be looked at. This is why I think we really need to have someone who knows more about this stuff than we do to help us with this. But the big thing is we want to have balance between the growth and overstripping infrastructure. I mean, that's the big thing with growth. Apartments and condos add value to the town. Single family buildings really don't, particularly if they have kids going to school in them. They cost more, so to speak, and value to town from the numbers I've seen on the ROIs and whatever. But then you bring in, so part of me is like, oh, great. So when they're in the growth area, let them grow. No constraints, no whatever. Let's just let them grow, let the market take care of it. Because when you do put artificial strictures on growth, you see what's happening right now in the real estate market, of which I'm an expert in. I see it every day. Housing prices are outrageous. You can't find anything in the town of Scarborough. I'm looking at Betsy for under 300 or 325 right now. And it's like, so how do we balance this? So I'm going to throw that out there. I'm saying, let's not put any control on it. Again, it's a theoretical, don't hold me to it, but I want to hear what your reactions are to the fact that we do have 485 units that are in approved house developments coming up. And what do we want to do about it? Who wants to be the first one, or I'm going to call on you? This is the old teacher talking. Jonathan, go ahead.
So I think I would be comfortable with that to some extent. However, I do think it just means, like, I think I think maybe Betsy's earlier point, like, I would want this to be an annual discussion where we're consistently assessing how that decision is impacting, town services. Are we really able to keep up with the pace of that? I think that's just my concern, is like, even though I know historically it sounds like things have generally been okay, at what point do we reach that tipping point where all of a sudden things start to crash? And like that to me is like, and again, maybe that's just my concern because I'm like a risk averse person and I don't like to put myself in situations where you're like, I get so close to something that things start to go bad. But I guess that's the thing I just personally don't feel comfortable about yet. And maybe I'll get there, but that having the unrestricted growth, well, I think it makes sense, and that's where we want the growth to be, in those high density areas. I'm very comfortable with thinking of like, how do we make sure those areas aren't as burdened by some of the restrictions we might want to place in others. So basically, I think I'm saying I'm not sure, but I could get there.
Yeah.
But especially, again, just making sure we know better, like what can we handle from a town, from a growth perspective, not just the school, but the town.
Betsy, go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, so, we started this whole thing off about talking about the intent of the GMO, and I agree with what Ken said, but I've written a couple of times in a few emails that I think there's a little more to it. I think, there is a desire to direct the types of growth, the areas of growth, the pace is one of the big things. And that, we want to provide quality services and affordable. And at the same time, we really want to be able to maintain natural resources and access to amenities and resources. We want to control traffic, and we want to protect the character of the town, whatever that means to different people. So I think there's a lot to the GMO. So I wouldn't be in favor of unrestricted growth, even in the growth areas. And I would have to look at more information. I think John Clucci says it the best, I think kids are great. I think whenever we talk about, let's make sure we build things that don't have kids because of the cost of the schools, it makes me want to cry. So, kids are our future. And one thing we do really well in Scarborough is raise great kids. So I think we need to be, cognizant of that. And, market demand, and we've talked a lot about tonight, it's certainly a consideration in what we're going to do here going forward. But the housing market, in my mind, is really composed of at least 4 factors and maybe more. One is consumer demand. We've talked a lot about it. Interest rates certainly drive it. What the developers want to build is presumably based on what they're being incentivized to build and what's most profitable to them, and their vision of market forces. And quite frankly, some level is driven by what's hot in municipal planning. And we know right now, multifamily planning is hot. We know a decade and a half ago, 2-acre lots were hot. We have to really think long-term for what we're doing, because now we have a side of town where we have large 2-acre lots. Some people enjoy them. They're starting to be more popular again. But, anything we do is going to have a very long term. So I think we have to think long-term and short-term. So I think the question was, about the high density growth areas, would I be in favor of just kind of letting them go in some way? And I guess I would have to say no, because for me, the GMO is about all of those things that I mentioned, not just and not just.
Okay, great. Those are real good points, Betsy. Thank you. John.
Yeah, so at my core, I would be like, let the market decide, right? Let's figure it out. But I kind of like John, I think that's a little too risky to do. But you put up a good graphic about approved subdivisions, and I think if we have a partner who's willing to invest in the infrastructure in a subdivision and we have it approved, they should have a pathway to finish that project. And I would be supportive of, and I don't know what the mechanism is. Maybe staff can help us with that. But after a subdivision is approved, maybe they provide a build out schedule so that we can look, this is what we expect to happen in the next 2-3 years. And that's another mechanism of, to control the growth they're keeping under wraps.
Paul. Thank you, John. Paul. You're on mute.
Oh, I got it.
That never happens.
I'm so used to having my mic on all the time. Anyways, John Clucci, that's precisely the conversation we had when we came up with the idea of the council permits, right? Is, how do we, we have, if we have something approved, if you can see it played out, whether that division or subdivision can be created in 3 months or 3 years, let's just plan accordingly. We know they're there, we know that they're coming, and we know what it's going to look like, right? So, and we're also in the, unique situation where we have a financial incentive to build as much value in the
Right.
Crossroads district as possible right now. And just numbers and cents wise as quickly as possible. Right. So I think those are things that we need to weigh as well. But I agree with you, John and John. I think, we do have that reporting system with the downs. So there's another side to that, right? Could part of that reporting system, can town do a complement report or supplemental report that talks about the cost specifically for those areas? That can't be that difficult to pull together necessarily. And I know some of that would just be extrapolation based off known quantities, but it's a good, and I think Peter Mishu did it somewhat appropriately when but it was more of a unit by unit, type of unit. It'd be really nice to actually know what is the cost to serve of the new Crossroads district, So.
Okay. Anybody else? Ken?
Well, maybe we should just do away with the GMO. Your graphic, I thought, drove it home. I counted about 500 to 600 units in the pipeline and approved. And we all know that we've got a couple big kahunas coming in front of the council now. So, GMO is useless. Rocky Risbera said it twice on the record. GMO adds no value. So I think I'm going to surrender on the growth and go with the flow.
Okay. Mr. Hamel.
Yeah, I'm a little mixed on this one. We've had so much trouble with, trying to, manage and then sort of incentivize growth. We go back and forth on it. So I was kind of okay with the way we were, putting the measures forward. So I don't have a strong opinion about, not following through on what we said at the outset and how this came for us in a workshop in terms of all 4 of the measures.
Okay. And again, I'm just throwing out that at least in the growth areas, let them build. But I will tell you that for myself, deep down inside, I'm like, yeah, from a purely logical point of view, it makes sense. But then for all the reasons that the others of you have talked about, how do we do it so that we're not getting in the way of creating the value and letting people build in places that have been approved to build? Because they are in the growth area.
I do not agree with just, kind of letting the market decide. I don't, I tend to be pretty conservative on economic and fiscal matters, but I do not believe that would work, particularly in this case, particularly at this time.
Hence, which brings up to me, again, I can't emphasize enough my desire to have someone come in here who's a neutral party, because we're not experts in this, and help us write a GMO. We can come up with some patchwork until we get something done, because we do need to do something, right away for certain, elements here. But Betsy, you got the last word, so I can see Paul's looking at his watch.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think, we do need to get, public input and feedback, and maybe even a survey about how people want to see growth. And I had another point, but I lost it, so I'm going to shut up.
That's okay. Thank you. That's it. I'm good.
It's your segment next, Betsy, so you're not allowed to shut up. So with that, Betsy is going to lead us in a discussion on the reserve pool. There's been some conversations about limiting it altogether. Do we limit it to preferred projects? So Betsy, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so in 2017, the council increased the reserve pool permits. And one of their factors was the number of permits unused in prior years. I think, you certainly could make some arguments, some justifiable reasons of doing this. But I think, to Councillor Johnson's point, what this overlooked was one of the key factors, if not the key factor of the GMO, is related to pace. How quickly can we sustain a pace without impacting services and, without changing the character of our town? Because the town is always going to change over time, but, the faster it changes, the more we're not going to recognize it. So, I believe that, we are talking about growth and types of growth. We're not trying to decide, what the population of Scarborough is going to be. A lot of that is out of our control, but the pace of the growth, along with some of these other things we've talked about, is something we should really look at. And so I think, some of the ideas, and I'm not sure if we were all really saying the same things and hearing each other. I think we were, but I think some of the ideas, but specifically about looking at growth permits per types of development in the areas for development. We've talked a lot about that. If we're doing this successfully, I think personally we should not need a reserve pool. But what we would need is an annual review. And then, we could reserve the right to grant building permits outside of the GMO, for contract zones or for this quote unquote counselor permit, with maybe some restrictions around it, that we wouldn't do it, more than, twice a year or something like that. I like contract zone language because, as Councillor Johnson has always pointed out, someone has to come with that and really show a worth to the town. So I think that, that would be allowed, but I've thought a lot about it and I can't find the value in the reserve pool. If we're truly reviewing this on an annual basis, it means it's not on automatic pilot, but if we get to a point where demand goes down, you could be a cursory review. Yep, everything's fine this year, but in these high growth periods and in a time of a lot of change, it's just going to need to be looked at. And just a matter of increasing reserve pool permits really doesn't do what we're talking about doing. So I think also if we did that through contract zones, now I think with the counselor permits, we'd have to also think about what role we want the planning board to play, because in my mind, I think they have a large role right now under reserve permits. So I would say that role wouldn't be the same, but it would be advisory, especially around a contract zone like it already is. And perhaps also if we do something with, instead of, contract zones, we do this with this quote unquote counselor permits, and that we would ensure that the planning board remained advisory in that. And that's it. Comments on, do we really need the reserve pool? Paul.
Real quick, I think Tom was going to mention this earlier. I did want to say, I met briefly with a town attorney a couple weeks back, and it is a no-no to create certain permits for certain types. So we do have to, it becomes some sort of discriminatory, obviously. So I'll have him draft something so we all have common things that we're reading off of. I just wanted to say that out loud. But
yeah,
Betsy,
so I guess we've seen like Wyndham and some other places recently been doing like that, like 2 multifamily projects a year or something like that. So I guess it's definitely worth exploring. I think Councillor Johnson mentioned that it was allowed under state law. So, I think we have to have that answer, for sure.
no, I agree. I think it's all in the nuances. I think it's just the way you frame it. So I think the way I framed it was different than saying exactly what you just said that other towns do. But I'm sorry, back to the topic at hand. I agree. I've always found the reserve pool to be arbitrary. We can quote add to it or deplete it at our will. So I've never quite understood the mechanism in itself. I get the spirit of it, but to me, I would rather make forget about if we took all the mechanisms of the reserve pool that exist right now and just kept it at 0 and issued them and created them in a same motion, that would make a lot more sense, which goes back to, there's some common themes here, Betsy, about, the yearly review, right? Do you take we're looking at a high growth year right now. Do we plan accordingly? So anyways, I echo a lot of your thoughts. I agree with most everything that you said. So Tom, did you want to correct me before? I'm sorry.
Not just correct you, but just remind all of us, and I don't know if you can pull up the agenda. Jay's memo includes, I think it's worth just looking at, because your statement that the reserve pool has been used arbitrarily, just I don't think is actually true. And I beg your pardon, but the planning board is bound by the council created priorities. They aren't making arbitrary decisions. They're saying, does it qualify to access the reserve pool or not? Whether those policy priorities are right or not.
The mechanism of replenishing them and spending them is arbitrary. That's what I meant. That's, yeah.
And to my knowledge, it's been done once in the last decade,
Yeah.
but fair point.
Back to you, Betsy. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, John Clucci.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the reserve pool as well. I think, there's kind of a practice where your legislative body makes the laws or the rules, and you have somebody else administer it. And in this case, it's the planning board, or it could be town staff. I think that's why the reserve pool is there today. It creates that mechanism where staff can continue to administer the program, and we can replenish it if we need it. But there's a very limited number of projects that actually qualify for reserve pool permit. So it's not really it's not incredibly useful to me as a mechanism. I like Betsy's point of having something where we review annually based on, on the ground, what's happening. And it might not be on a project by project basis, but that's how we kind of authorize what can be permitted in the next year. So I agree with that point. Practically how we do it, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the best way to take into account market factors. And if the economy slows way down, it's probably very easy. Anybody else?
So can we say a consensus is to have a future discussion, or maybe ask staff to consider a mechanism of a yearly review versus a reserve pool, and just see how that might look, and if they hate it or love it, or if it's possible, and we'll pick it back up. Is that a good consensus?
Yeah.
Oh, too bad. Tom's on mute. Too bad.
I'm trying to protect you against yourself. To subject yourself to this discussion every year, I think is a big lift. But we'll certainly provide some language and some thoughts in that regard.
That was my first thought, Tom, too. But well, okay. I'm going to Betsy. Thank you. I'm going to skip mine. I will use mine is about the short-term growth permit solution. It's a first reading action item at the meeting. So if you are in the public and would like to speak to this, I will begin public comment on the GMO now. And then if we run out of time, we'll get you right at the top of the meeting. So if anybody wants to speak to the GMO discussion we just had, please raise your hand. Mr. Kerr, I will allow you to talk. Go ahead. You're on mute, George. You just need to unmute yourself. You should be good. Can you hear me? All right, George, we cannot hear you. So I'm going to put you back to the audience and get back to you. Anybody else? Okay, I see none. So we were going to adjourn till 7 p.m. and we'll continue the regular town council meeting. If you still have something to say, you can, at the start of our 7 o'clock meeting, you can jump right in. So with that, we'll take 5 and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Hey, Tom, we're bringing Tody in, right? Sorry, Tody, you're out there, no man's land. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, I should say. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. I have a counselor in the audience I need to bring up. Okay. I think we're good. Is Ken? Yeah, okay. Good evening, everybody. This is the Wednesday, March 17th, 2021 regular town council meeting of Scarborough, Maine. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3 is roll call. Tody?
Counselor Clucci?
Here.
Counselor Gleisteen?
Here.
Counselor Anderson?
Here.
Counselor Katarina?
Here,
Counselor Johnson?
Here.
Counselor Hamel?
Here.
And Chairman Johnson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 4 is general public comments. If anybody from the workshop we just had about the growth management, if you would like to speak to that, now is a good place.
I just wanted to relay that I did hear from George Kerr, who was not able, he was stuck on mute. And he just wanted to thank the committee for the work, and he owns Sea Ridge subdivision and would be appreciative of any short-term remedy or relief that we're able to provide.
Thank you, sir. I see none others. So with that, I'm going to move on to approval of the March 3rd, 2021 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
so moved.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none. Tody?
Counselor Clucci?
Yes.
Counselor Gleisteen?
Yes.
Counselor Anderson?
Yes.
Counselor Katarina?
Yes,
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Counselor Hamel?
Yes.
And Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the agenda in the background to have it to use. Okay. Item number 6 is adjustments to the agenda. I don't believe there are any. Item number 7 is treasurer's warrants. I have signed everything I need to sign. Item number 8 is the town manager report. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of points of interest tonight. Budget schedule. I did communicate with the council, but I want to take this opportunity to talk to the public as well. I'm proposing that we delay the budget presentation and first reading for 1 week. So the new schedule would be presentation on April 7 and first reading would be a special meeting of council on April 14th. The reason for that is kind of twofold. One, we are within days of receiving our financial audit back, and it only makes sense to fully understand how we ended the last fiscal year before we start talking about the next one. So actually 2 of them ago. So that is in process and will be in hand with that revised timeline. The other one is really the uncertainty associated with some of the federal COVID relief. I honestly don't know that it will have great clarity even by then, but there's the potential for some benefits to our bottom line, and those details simply don't exist yet. So a little extra time may benefit, and certainly the Finance Committee and the full council we'll know far more before you're ever in a position of adopting a budget. So with your, and I have coordinated this through the Finance Committee as well, I believe everything else will be able to modify to that revised schedule, just slightly changed at the start. Comp plan, I'm pleased to advise that as of today, we did ship it off to GP Cog. We've contracted with them to do kind of copy editing, and that work will probably take 2, perhaps 3 weeks at most. By the end of the week or early next week, we will be sending kind of advanced copies to council. Just to appreciate that there may be some final editing changes, but we wanted to get this to you in enough time that you could look and identify that the changes that were discussed and we received from the public have in fact been made to the document. So I'll coordinate with Councilor Anderson, who's really been running point on this issue, and I think we'll be in a position shortly to lay out a fairly firm timeline over the next several weeks and months, looking toward final adoption. I would note at this point, I think very comfortably within the council's stated goal. So pleased to report that. A number of councilors have been kind of communicating with some residents of close to the Piper Shores project. Town staff has been fully involved and engaged with those folks. The issues have been various, including boundary line questions, which have been resolved, some drainage issues, which again have been resolved. And then the next level of conversation really will be focused around the berm. You may recall that was a requirement that they do that first, essentially, to make sure that the immediate abutters on Newcomb Ridge Road have the benefit of that berm and landscaping up at the beginning of the project rather than midpoint or at the end. A number of residents are inquiring further about the final look and the feel of that berm. So we do have requested kind of visual renderings of what that will look like from different vantage points, and we'll be sharing that with the abutters. This is an issue that I'd like to, frankly, wrestle with sooner than later with the abutters, so everyone appreciates what the planning board approved, what the property owner must build, and that we'll certainly hold them to. So I just want to make you aware that that project is fully involved, and town staff is quite engaged at this point. By now, I suspect everyone is aware that Chief Moulton is going to retire early July this year. 44 years of service, just a tremendous personal and professional accomplishment on his part. It's an overused phrase, but certainly very big shoes to fill. He's just really provided tremendous leadership to that organization and left it in a very good position as we look forward. As of today, the opening was posted. We're doing a national search, and we're looking to close that by April 25th. Part of that timeline has to do with the realization that Sanford and South Portland are both actively in the market looking for chiefs. And just, I believe Freeport and Westbrook may still be open and in process as well. So a fairly hot commodity, and we want to be kind of in the middle of that conversation with viable candidates. The intent is to certainly have his replacement named before he leaves. In some cases, we like to have some transition. He's got a very good seasoned command staff, so I don't see that there needs to be any extended overlap, if you will, but I'll certainly feel more comfortable having everything in line. I fully expect the successful candidate will be an active professional somewhere else in a high-level position, and so I anticipate there'll be some extended notice to current employers that we need to respect and work through. But I'm pleased to have got things launched and very excited to see the interest that might be shown here. It should come as no surprise. I suspect this job will be fairly attractive and highly sought after by professionals. So Alder Hall, just a quick update. You may recall, in addition to the purchase of that building, the council did also authorize some funds for immediate repairs. We have accomplished foundation repairs already. We are collecting additional estimates for roof and trim repairs and expect to do that as soon as we can this spring. And just as an aside, the Historical Society has inquired to me, and I'll bring it to the council formally at some point. Left in the premises were a number of items, but in particular, there are 4 historic benches, very nice period pieces from the original Grange Hall. They would like to request, and maybe we can do this on some sort of temporary loan or permanent loan to them, to use them up at the Beech Ridge Schoolhouse as some of the decor. And I think they'd actually work quite well there. So I just mentioned that in passing. I'll work through council leadership. This is a matter that I suspect the council would need to approve, but I wanted to mention it as we're talking about it. Just something that's been on my mind. It's come up in a number of committees, and I intend to bring it up with council leadership as we start to think about the future and hopefully emerge from this current environment of remote meetings. Things are looking good, particularly in our state, and I'm hopeful that in the coming months we'll be in a different position. I think Councillor Gleisning had mentioned it the other day at one of the committee meetings. One of the silver linings, or actually a resident mentioned it through all of this, is really the ability for the public to connect to our meetings and be able to record all of these proceedings and have folks be able to participate live or after the fact. I suspect the interest and the sort of utility of that is not going to go away, and we should be thinking about and making arrangements of how we're going to be able to operate as a body in the future to allow remote participation by at least the public. It remains to be seen whether this format will be allowed for elected officials. Currently, you're doing this under kind of emergency authorization through governor's orders. And I believe there's one or more bills pending in this legislative session that will enable remote participation in meetings. Right now, it's not allowed under law. So we'll have to see how that all shakes out. But I'm quite certain that the public will, I think, have a reasonable expectation to be able to continue to connect going forward. And so there'll just be some technical issues and maybe organizational issues that we ought to start thinking about. And lastly, just kind of foreshadowing, kind of housekeeping issues, looking at what's coming at you in April. You may have noted in this agenda, we've brought forward kind of a new concept, thanks to Councilor Anderson's suggestion, which is kind of a cover sheet that will accompany each action item. This is our first pass through. So Tody, thank you very much for assisting in that. And it's, I guess I ask you to be patient. It's a bit of a work in progress. I do have some discussion items in the budget that will actually take this to a whole new and different level, but I think this is a good first interim step. But as I look forward to actual agenda items, you may recall the temporary, I think, emergency ordinance that you passed for outdoor dining. That is due to expire. The extension is due to expire April 15th. And staff is starting to talk about, what does that mean? And should there be another very small extension just to get us to that little later point? So that will be coming back to you, presumably at your first meeting in April. And then Tody's working on any number of license renewals. This is the time of year for food handlers, liquor licenses, coincidentally, shellfish allocation. Those licenses will be coming forward next meeting. And I believe Liam said there's a marijuana license in process as well. So be ready for a heavy diet of license considerations. Tody's making all the arrangements for public notice in the paper. So we'll be in a position to work those through the month of April. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions.
I think Mr. Hamill had a question. Don?
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Tom, for the update. Very helpful. Two quick questions. One was relating to the date, the postponement for the school budget. Can you confirm that this date will not affect our ability to comply with the statutory deadline for voting the budget?
Yes, it will not. It will not. The original schedule for second reading and obviously the validation vote remain unchanged. And there's enough flexibility in the interim in between the first and second reading for Finance Committee, I think, to do a thorough review. They'll be taking that matter up, and perhaps Councillor Clucci will speak to that later at their meeting next week in terms of exactly how they want to handle the review this year. It's always been a little different, but no, it will have no effect on the overall final timeline.
Great, thank you. And one other quick question. I know when we were going through the decision and the recommendation, the approval of purchasing the Masonic building, there were a fair number of inspections, and I expected there were going to be expenses and also costs associated with certain things that needed taken care of right away. Can you give us an idea of when we can kind of get an update on that? I don't recall what we appropriated, but is there going to be like a key date that you could offer that might be meaningful to give an update on that? Thanks.
Yeah, the two things that you authorized, in my recollection, it was about $20,000 in addition to the purchase price, was foundation repairs and roof repairs. Those are really deemed to be kind of critical. Foundation is accomplished, so I can give you a final accounting of that. It was a couple of $1,000, but I'll give you the details. And the roof, perhaps as soon as the next meeting, I will have firm estimates there. In the budget, we do have a capital project for furnace replacement, which is also something we knew that was coming at us. Not as critical as roof, obviously. So yes, I'll be able to give you a full and detailed accounting of the further investments we've made.
Great, Tom, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks. Any other questions for Tom? Okay, seeing none, we are going to move on to order number 20. Thank you, Tom. We're going to move on to order number 21017. It's a 7 p.m. public hearing only on the proposed amendment, on proposed amendment 4 to contract zone 5, proposed by Mercedes-Benz on the property located at 137 US Route 1, Scarborough. We discussed this and had first reading on it last meeting, I believe. So is anybody in the public like to speak to this? It's a public hearing only. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Order number 21021 is a first reading and refer to the planning board the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the town of Scarborough zoning ordinance, section 20, business office research district, otherwise known as BOR, subsection C, special exception. This is property owner initiated. We've had a workshop on this, discussed it, I think, in a couple different forums as well. But Tom, would you like to refresh us?
Yeah, certainly. The workshop you held, well, I should back up. The basic request is to allow assisted living as a permitted use within the business office and research zoning district. The council's workshop focused on kind of the two paths that could take. Initially, there was conversation around a contract zone approach. And then in the end, I think the majority, the will of the council was that this was fairly straightforward. The district is fairly well confined, and that really the preferred approach would be to simply modify the zone to allow this as a permitted use. I do know that the at least consultants for the applicant are here if you wish to have them provide any further details, but that's the essence of the request before you.
Thank you, sir. Is there do anybody have any questions for the consultant before we put it on the floor? Seeing none, is there anybody in the public that would like to speak to this? Okay, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Councilor Caterina?
Yeah, I know at the workshop, I was pleased to see this come forward. I think it's a good location for assisted living facility. And I believe I was one of the folks that was like, just why don't we just make a change to the ordinance rather than go through the whole contract zone? As I recall, is there still some land, and I'm sorry, I haven't read this part of the packet in a few days, that they were going to put some land to the land trust or make available, or am I remembering this correctly?
You are in my, Jean Marie, I remember the same thing. Yes, there's 10 acres that he has committed to.
Okay.
Putting
Which
in.
I think is awesome. That was just my point.
Yep.
That I think that makes all the sense in the world, particularly given that you're in the corridor there of the Nonsuch River. So.
I just want to be clear that technically that's not part of this. I mean, that's
Right.
one of the
Right.
differences, but I had multiple conversations with Mr. Goodrow, the landowner. He again confirmed to me, as he did to you in that public meeting, that's his intention. I'll speak to him to initiate that process, maybe to run parallel with this, so you have some assurance that it's going to happen. Okay.
Thanks, Tom. Any other comments or discussions, Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, I think it's a good fit for the area. I think it ties in with the medical, the other medical research and facilities that are there. I think it's fantastic that he's going to be giving some land to the land trust. And that was the determining factor, I guess, between contract zone or not, is the contract zone, you can require it. I think we're all pretty comfortable that he was going to do it on his own, which is why we kind of encouraged him to come this route. But I'm glad to hear that Tom will, initiate that process anyway, so that when it comes back to us at second reading, that we can have some something a little more tangible about it.
Good. Any others? Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, I think I was one at the workshop that was still deliberating between contract zone or major zone change. And I still debate that a lot in my head on a lot of the things that we have to deal with as a council. But looking at this one specifically, I think based on what Jean Marie and John both said, I think the use for an assisted living makes a lot of sense there compared to where it's located and everything surrounding it. So I think it makes sense.
Thanks, sir. Any others? Okay, Tody, do you want to call the vote? Oh, Betsy? Oh, you got to get off mute.
Thanks.
Yep.
So could we just look at the, could you just possibly bring up the language before the vote?
Bear with me.
Yeah, I know, it's not easy, sorry.
Oh, shoot, I've been showing Mercedes. Nobody told me I've been showing Mercedes-Benz this whole time. So much for you guys paying attention to me, huh?
Didn't see anything.
Just trying to be gracious, that's all.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Hold on.
I didn't see it, so I don't know. What I was looking at.
Paul, it's actually on Exhibit 5. I think you're still in.
Yeah.
You're still there.
I'm still in Mercedes-Benz.
Correct.
Good Lord, look at the paperwork just to change a window. Look at this. All right.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Hold on. It's almost as if we should have these easy to read cover letters for each one of these. Hold on.
If we really get smart, we'll index our agendas, right?
Yes, right, exactly. You said it here. Betsy, did you want to ask your question while I'm doing this? It's a little embarrassing.
No, it would help to have the language.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh, I found it.
Keep going. Now,
No, that's it. We're good.
It's Exhibit 5.
Yeah.
If he wants to see the actual language.
I think it adds it as it's very simple. It adds it as a special exception. And it's fairly specific language too.
I got it. Here we go.
One more page.
There it is. Phew.
So I guess my question is what does the residential part mean? So any residential can now go in this zone? Or is it just long-term care and assisted living?
No, I believe that's an existing definition in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, I'm sorry to butt in it. It just means residential care facility. So residential or long-term care, they're both got specific definitions under like Medicare and Medicaid and all of that. So
Okay. All right, yeah, I just saw residential. I'm like, well, does it need more words to say residential, what it is? Or,
That is a defined term in our zoning ordinance, residential and long-term care
it's
facility.
defined. Okay, all right, thank you. That's it. Sorry, you had to go through all that.
No, it's okay. I think I'm going to call the vote now. Okay, go ahead, Tody.
Counselor Pucci. Counselor Gleisty.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Yes.
Counselor Katerina,
Yes,
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes,
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, order number 21022. It's the first reading and refer it to the planning board. The proposed amendments to 405, the Town of Scarborough zoning, section 6 definitions. Tom, do you want to tee this up?
Yeah, this language really was an outgrowth of a meeting that Chairman Johnson and I had with the town attorney. The specific question was really around the question that's been asked of the council for some weeks or months now regarding the facility that is being constructed in the industrial park, the so-called detention or processing facility. As I don't need to go into the details of what's been discussed in the past, but those approvals are in hand. There are vested rights with that project, and it is proceeding. But when asked the attorney as to what can we do going forward, his suggestion was to remove that as a permitted use in the ordinance. And in doing so, we kind of stumbled on some inconsistencies. So what's before you is a new definition, and that use is non-municipal government buildings and uses, and then a clarification of the existing definition for non-municipal government offices, which is the use under which this current use was allowed. Chairman Johnson, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add. You were part of that conversation.
Yep, no, that's perfect. Thank you. So yeah, this is co-sponsored by Councilor Anderson and I think he deserves most of the credit. I'm gonna, before I go to the public, John, I'll let you say how this came about. I'll add anything that I feel necessary, then we'll go to the public.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. I think it's just important that the public knows that as a council, we've heard you, we've heard your concerns. I also think it's worth noting that while we've heard the concerns around this particular facility, the ICE facility that's going to be there, we also recognize that there's a lot of opinions about this in the town that aren't all alike, and I think there's a lot of opinions that aren't alike on this council because we really represent everybody in the community. And so I think this is kind of a good compromise that kind of moves us forward by thinking about the feedback we've gotten from the community, but also to make sure, again, as a town, we have more time to deliberate if something like this were to happen again. And I like the broadness of the language to think about, these types of facilities in general, not just this particular ICE facility, but, other things like detention centers and things that the state could bring forward. So I think really this was us listening to the community, getting the feedback and trying to take action in areas that we have our responsibility for.
Yeah, well said, John. I agree with all of it. I think, we're the most local form of government, and the saying goes, crap rolls downhill. And oftentimes, whether it's property tax or issues like this, we're stuck with dealing with it, so to speak. And so I think that this is in the pocket of what we do and within our authority, and I think it's appropriate. And I don't think there's much else that we're willing to do, or I would be willing to do that addresses this. I think this is a great combination of how can we react and respond, but also keep it to what our actual scope is as our body. So I think you said it best, John, and I appreciate that.
Could I just add, Paul, for the benefit of everyone, what this does in practical effect is not allow any similar facilities to come forward and be allowed. And moreover, the existing facility, it makes it a legally non-conforming use. And so should they wish to do any alterations in the future, they must receive there's additional processes with the Zoning Board of Appeals that is required. So it adds additional rigors to the process.
Thank you. So before I go to our discussion, I will go to the public. And Ms. Woodbury, you will be allowed to, Ms. Woodbury, you'll be allowed to talk. Maria, you have an old version of Zoom, so you're going to be promoted to panelist. I'm going to ask that you turn your camera off to speak, please. So when I pull you in, please pull your camera off.
Hello.
Yep,
Is the
you're all
audio
set.
working?
Thank you. Yep.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this item. I had just a quick point of order before I begin my comments, if that's all right.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, point of order. Could we get people's address and where they're from?
Yep, Ms. Woodbury, could you state your address, please?
I prefer mix versus miss, and I live in Westbrook.
Thank you. And now you had a point of order, I think?
Yeah, I was wondering if there is going to be a general public comment period during this meeting.
It was item number 4 on the agenda this evening.
Okay. On this item, so I'll move along with my comments on this. I'm just speaking in favor, basically, of the proposed ordinance. I think that preventing further expansion of these types of facilities and ensuring discussion and full transparency on this type of facility and others similar to it with immigration and customs enforcement, as well as anything else that would detain or incarcerate people is a good idea. So I am speaking in favor of the ordinance tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I'm going to, sometimes with the old version of Zoom, it's a little bit tricky, so bear with me if you. Okay, I've learned how to do that. Next, Mr. Green, you are up.
Good evening. My name is, I'm the Reverend Zeb Green. I live in Skowhegan, Maine, and I'm an organizer with De-Ice Maine. And we represent many local people in our coalition, live in Scarborough, along with partnerships with directly impacted people throughout Maine who feel the brunt of ICE and immigration enforcement, and as an assault to their dignity and their just all around humanity. We're very grateful that you put this ordinance forward. We, as an organization, ask you to pass it and vote yes. We're pleased that you've listened to our voices and have done something. We will further be asking y'all to unanimously denounce through a resolution that you do not want this facility. We know that that will not be binding and not force them, but we would like you to honor the anti-racist resolution that y'all made in October and use that to denounce this facility, along with asking and requiring that no town official can collaborate with ICE. That includes no town law enforcement being able to give up people's immigration status or detaining people on questionable immigration status and giving that information to ICE. But that's for another night. So for tonight, please, yes, vote yes on this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Testing. Unfortunately, I'm not going to allow you to speak. You do not have a name. And unfortunately, one of the bad effects of going virtual is that there's been some bad actors in Zoom and other local meetings, so I apologize. But testing, you will not be brought in. Tina Davis, you will be next.
Hi there. My name is Tina Marie Davidson. I'm a Portland resident, and my pronouns are she and her. And I would like to ask you to denounce this as well. As a Portland resident, when ICE moved into One City Center, it moved in with a lot of secrecy, and a lot of the community members no longer felt comfortable in that building or around that building. And so it really caused a big problem for the community because that building had lots of other services in it as well. So, and I just listened to the council meeting. A lot of people talked about how important children are and how they're our future and how Scarborough raises great children. And having an ICE facility, ICE, that separates families and traumatizes children is just not consistent with what you're saying Scarborough is important to the community, the children.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm going to ask for a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
And Ms. Katerina.
Yeah, I want to thank both Counselor Anderson and Counselor Johnson for bringing this forward. For people who have been following this since last year. Yeah, personally, I have a lot of concerns with this facility being here in town. But I have to agree with both Mr. Anderson and Mr. Johnson that, you know, as a council, the overarching issue is a national issue and an issue of how we're going to treat each other as citizens. I do want to make reference to, and if people on the council would bear with me, the Portland Press Herald editorial board did a really good editorial on March 12th, and I'm going to read from, that has to do with the involvement of local officials in national issues. And they said, and this is just a quotation from, it says, another that is that every national partisan fight is mirrored by officials locally. That's why we have county commissioners taking on mask mandates they have nothing to do with, and selectmen declaring their town a Second Amendment sanctuary. That sort of partisan signaling certainly does not help lower the tax rate, improve schools, or attract businesses. Instead, it builds acrimony and it hardens positions. That's not the way to build better communities. Some politics must remain local. Some solutions must transcend partisanship. Local officials are asked to figure out things like where to put the new police station and whether the town needs a community center. State legislators vote on the same budget, advocate for local needs, and handle problems for constituents. That's why they are there, and that's what voters should be focused on. And I believe that Mr. Anderson mentioned that in his opening remarks. We absolutely hear you. I hear you. Anyone on this council will tell you I'm probably the biggest liberal going. But I will tell you honestly that we've done what we can do. We've brought forward this amendment that I think deals very nicely with it. It makes this use non-conforming so that if they want to expand or whatever, they're going to have to jump through a million hoops. I will also remind people that there is a concept called federal preemption that I'm not going to get into in any detail here, but the federal government, if they choose to do something and they're heck bent, I'm not going to swear on council meeting, on doing it, they're going to do it, regardless of what our ordinances are. So I'm very happy to see the ACLU is doing their lawsuit. And I am very happy to see DICE out there doing what they need to do. But, you know, we've done what we can do and will do as a council. So we need to move forward as a council. And that's all I have to say, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Councilor Cucci?
Yeah, I'd also like to thank John and Paul for bringing this forward. I think it's an appropriate reaction and solution to the situation that we find ourselves in. I also want to make it clear there, I don't think any of us really went out and was trying to entice ICE to come to Scarborough. We don't have a holding facility in our new, very large public safety building. It's just not really our style here. But the fact is our ordinances allowed it, and it got through the process. So I think this is a way to clarify that, yeah, you know what, this isn't really a good fit, at least from my perspective, for Scarborough, and it will help prevent other similar uses from co-locating or being nearby, which I think it will be a positive for the town.
Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, I just would say I think this is a good solution. I also think something that I've been thinking about, just based on some of the feedback that we've gotten around the social and racial injustice resolution that was passed, is that as a body, we should figure out a little bit more how to bring that more to life and the policy decisions and things that we're making. And I know we've got a lot on our plates, but I just would like to propose after budget, maybe we do hold some sort of workshop or something that allows us to kind of look at that through the context of immigration, but through a broader lens around what was intended for that resolution, and start to have a conversation around it. Again, not to necessarily identify specifics, but just make sure that we understood what we committed to and what we can do surrounding it. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and I think, John, just what you brought up, like, I don't think we would have known to change the ordinance the way we did had this not come here. So this is kind of a lessons learned for us for our ordinances and the language there. So for those in the community who are outside of Scarborough, who we know are very interested in this topic, share this with the other towns as well if it's something that they need to be educated on, because if your concern is about ice in Maine, we've addressed it as best we can, I think, in Scarborough with this ordinance, but there's an opportunity to share that elsewhere. So I would just ask that people consider how to take our lessons learned and share it more broadly.
Thank you. Councilor Gleisten?
Yeah, I think that, it would be really awesome if we could have, not necessarily sponsored by the council, but this is, a large issue, and it's a global issue in terms of impact on people in many, many places. And we've had some community forums on other topics, which have been local in nature, which I think have been quite helpful. But I certainly would be really willing to participate in some dialogue around this issue, not per se this ice in Scarborough, but immigration in general, because, personally, I have a lot of opinions that I would love to share. I don't think local government really has much that we can say on some of these topics. I think this is a great solution that's come forward. But I appreciate the op-ed that, Councilor Caterina shared, because, if we can't maintain respect and transparency and integrity at the local government level, then I don't know, if we're going to lose all self-government. So I really appreciate the people that brought this forward from Scarborough. There's a lot of people in Scarborough that have a passion for this, and I have heard that, and I'm really happy to have something brought forward that can address some of their concerns. I know it doesn't answer all of their concerns, but I feel like this is a good solution to act on the local level, which is what we do. And I hope that we have a dialogue as a community and surrounding communities about immigration in general, and that we could, have respect and come to some common understanding around this issue, and lead our leaders who are really not leading on this at the national level.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, Tody, you want to call the vote?
Councilor Pucci,
Yes.
Councilor Gleisten,
Yes.
Councilor Anderson,
Yes.
Councilor Katarina,
Yes.
Councilor Johnson,
Yes.
Councilor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. I was turning my camera off to drink my tea, but I stopped. I'm just owning it. Order number 21023 is first reading and schedule a public hearing on the proposed amendment to Chapter 608A, the Town of Scarborough Fireworks Consumer Ordinance. And I will let Jean Marie tee this up. Then I will go to the public, and then I will put it on the floor for us. So Jean Marie?
Yes, thank you. I know I brought it up last time. It seems like we may be able to work out a compromise position. I want to thank everyone who wrote in, emailed us, and backed up my position that it needs to be all of Scarborough, but if it's not going to go that way, it's not going to go that way. And again, this is just the first reading. But what we've come up with is this, and what it is that the Consumer Fireworks Section 4, Section A, there's a new addition. It says only in areas north of US Route 1. All areas on the ocean side of US Route 1, fireworks are prohibited. And then just changed A to B and then B to C. So all we're doing is banning the consumer use of fireworks. Now, I do know that we heard from one or two people who talked about, oh, they set off fireworks for their neighborhood and whatever. And I think that's fine. That's awesome. But, you can certainly hire someone to do it. I just think that, this will do what we need it to do. particularly since it's, the beach areas and the more closely populated areas of town that have more of the fire risk.
Thank you.
That's it.
Oh, sorry. Are you good?
That's
Sorry. Yeah. Any members of the public like to speak before we start our discussion? Is it McCaska? I'm sorry.
Yep. Yes.
Yep.
Gretchen McKeska. Thank you for recognizing me. And I am in agreement with the proposal. I live at 14 Houghton Street, Higgins Beach, and spoke at a few of the other meetings. I was a beach monitor this year, and the fireworks are very disturbing to the endangered species that we have at Higgins Beach, the piping plovers and the least terns. And as you heard in previous meetings, we almost lost the least tern population on 4th of July this year. I wanted to point out once again that according to the state fire marshal, Scarborough is an outlier in southern Maine and along the coast in not prohibiting fireworks. So I'll just go through the towns that most of them prohibit both sale and use of fireworks, starting from the south: Wells, York, Kennebunk, Algonquin, Old Orchard Beach, Biddeford, Saco, South Portland, Falmouth, Yarmouth, Bath, Brunswick, Freeport, Rockland, Damariscotta, Camden, Booth Bay, and Mount Desert. So I just wanted to point out that, we are kind of alone in the position that we were in, and these towns have a ban across the entire town, and some of these towns are large, like Scarborough, that have a significant inland piece as well. However, I am, from the bird point of view and from living at Higgins Beach, we are addressing my sort of immediate concerns, but I think that the compromise is sufficient, but if we would have gone for the whole town, I would be even more pleased. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, you are coming in next.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Yep.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah, I'm one of those people who wrote the letter about having a neighborhood fireworks party. I emailed that this morning. I appreciate some of the responses that some of you responded with. That was thoughtful. And, I'm failing to add some things up. And, I don't know if I'm looking to understand it or more just portray another perspective here. I'm probably speaking for 150 people, of which I'd say 40 are adults right now. And I can certainly do a petition and add the names up. But, this is just a friendly conversation at this point, as far as I'm seeing it. If this is about the piping plovers, I'm very curious to know, what documented evidence there is that fireworks 3 miles away are disturbing their nesting habit. Because I live in a neighborhood in Pleasant Hill, which is 3 miles away. I just am having a tough time grasping the concept that that's going to disturb the piping plovers. If it's not about the piping plovers, then why is there a line of demarcation at all being proposed as a compromise? Why isn't it the whole town? So there's just some logic that I'm not coping with very well. For me, this is really about a town community kind of, or I should say a neighborhood community kind of building type thing, where we really try to develop relationships with our neighbors. This is a very positive thing. We're developing memories for kids. We're certainly open to any neighbors that object, and I'll certainly tone down the show if that ever happens. We've been doing this for 5 years. We haven't had a single complaint. We always get the word out with some hand-delivered flyers, so people know what to expect. I understand dogs can be a concern, so we're sensitive to that. We have a dog as well. And we certainly are open to discussing, you know, lessening the power of some of these fireworks. We don't have huge ones. But, you know, as far as doing a private show and going commercial, you're talking some significant money that we just don't have to spend. You know, that's just not an option. So I would ask that if this is about the piping plovers, then let's get a study and maybe consider a narrower line of demarcation. And I would propose Route 77 being that line. Study it for a couple years with no fireworks and see if that has made a difference. And if it has, then that issue might be resolved on its own without impacting such a big, vast area where really the majority of, I think, people in Scarborough live. That's really what I wanted to say. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Miss Packerdunia, I apologize if I completely butchered the name.
Nope, you said it perfectly.
Doing a good job today. All right. I avoided it last week. I don't know if you remember. So I'm growing as a
scarier
person.
than it is.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time and for allowing me to speak. Jenny Packerduny, I live at 6 White Sands Lane. And I spoke at the last meeting. First of all, I want to say I support the amendment to the ordinance to extend the ban on fireworks to Route 1. And I also want to say the gentleman who spoke before me mentioned the line being Route 77. That's like within the endangered species habitat. So having the line be Route 77 doesn't help. It's right on the marsh. It crosses the marsh. It crosses the tidal river. That's like totally unacceptable. So it's like it's not far enough away. There are two issues here, one being the endangered species. I happen to live right behind the colony. I was also a volunteer last summer, and I was here the 4th of July weekend. I witnessed the near loss of the tern colony and the threats to the plover chicks. So there are 2 endangered species colonies there that are enmeshed. So that's one issue. But then the other issue is that I live in a community where our homes are extremely close together. They're all very old. This is one of the older sections of Higgins Beach left, with the original cottages that are like, you know, all wood. They're very close together, and there are a lot of fireworks that go off in this neighborhood. And, you know, people are drinking, you know, it's 4th of July. It's like, yeah, everybody wants to celebrate, and I get it. I like to as well, but I don't feel comfortable at all as a resident having the fireworks that close to my home. And I don't think it's safe to have them that close to everyone else's homes. So although I do understand the gentleman spoke before me, wanting to have a community fireworks celebration, I think that's a great idea. There should be further discussion about that. I'm not sure how it can happen in a safe way, but it definitely cannot happen within, you know, several miles of the nesting colony. Within 2 miles is enough to during the peak. I mean, that's the absolute peak. July 4th is unfortunately the absolute peak nesting season. And so the 2 issues for me are, you know, equally important as a resident and as someone who cares about endangered species. So thank you very much for your time and for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. And I don't see any more. So I am going to close public comment and ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
And discussion. Councilor Katarina and then Councilor Gleisten.
Yeah, just to the gentleman, and I'm sorry I missed his name on the thing, who spoke about the neighborhood. I think that's great. They do something in the neighborhood, but it is not just about the piping plovers. I know there are sensitive areas throughout town, wildlife areas, bird areas, and whatever. That is why one of the reasons why I initially proposed banning it in the whole town. And again, fire risk from consumer fireworks is potentially pretty high. Last year we had a drought. The year before it was drought wasn't as bad as last year. This year they're thinking we're going to potentially be in a pretty good drought. If you live out in my neck of the woods, it wouldn't take much to set the woods in back of me afire and have a pretty good blaze going pretty quickly. But that being said, I'm willing to compromise and at least get the beach areas and that side of town on the other side of Route 1. And I think Route 1 makes perfect sense because it does encompass the marsh and it does encounter a lot of the headwaters of the Nonsuch River, the Rachel Carson Preserve, and a number of other places. So again, this is why I put this forward. I certainly understand concerns. I would prefer a town-wide one, but I'm willing to compromise.
Thank you. Councilor Gleisteen?
Yeah, I had a question and a comment. So the wording north of US Route 1, what does that mean exactly?
Well, we introduced north, but we also talked Oceanside to make sure it was absolutely clear as to which side of the road we were referring to. It's not, Route 1 doesn't run perfectly east-west, but I think it's as best a way to describe what's intended by the restriction. And I think it's buttressed by the fact that we talk about the prohibition on the ocean side. If there's any question, that should clarify it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I have a couple of comments. So, when this was brought forward, the thing that definitely piqued my interest was the piping plover. So the line that, that I would draw would not be Route 1. I do think that this has been in place for many years in Scarborough. It's my understanding we haven't had a fire call on it. And it's only a couple of days a year. And I think many people do enjoy it. And we added some notifications of intent to the ordinance. So I think protecting the piping plovers was definitely what I was hoping to see. But beyond that, it's a little more restrictive than I would like to see. In terms of fire, though, I do think, and perhaps Tom, you can answer this, because one of the things I did feel was missing from this is if the fire chief were to feel that there is a danger, can he place a moratorium based on this ordinance or any other authority in town and say, yes, this is allowed July 3rd and 4th, but this July 3rd and 4th, this is restricted due to extremely high fire danger. I know some places out west did that. I thought perhaps the notification of intent could do that, but looking at that, again, it's not really permission, it's just notification of intent. So is there a mechanism that the fire chief can say, shut it down during an extreme high fire? And if not, I guess I would ask if other counselors would be interested in entertaining an amendment that would allow this to happen.
To answer your question, there's no specific authority granted to the fire chief or anyone else in this ordinance, but I believe there are other authorities granted through state law, and I think we really fall under those that would give the authority to either our local fire chief or the fire marshal's office to actually institute more restrictive measures. I can certainly confirm that. I will confirm that before you consider this further, but I'm quite sure that authority exists.
Okay, good.
Can I, so what's the deal with this consumer fireworks notification of intent?
It's really
that came in the 1 year I wasn't on the council, so.
Yeah, it's to ensure really for a dispatch. So we have ideally some prior knowledge of where fireworks are likely to occur. it's, as was mentioned earlier, it's not a permit, it's not approval, it's simply making us aware to the extent that we are responding to calls. So it's not fail-safe, but I think it's certainly a valiant effort.
So it's a voluntary notification, so it's worth the paper it's written on. Is that correct?
I wouldn't use that many words, those exact words. I think it serves the purpose. Is it followed 100% of the time? I don't expect it is, no.
I think one person that wrote in said that they do complete it. With the gentleman that spoke earlier tonight.
Councilor Anderson? Hey guys, I'm just going to mute you if you're not talking, just for feedback purposes, but. Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, I've been struggling with this one. I think last week I was looking for a compromise from the all-out ban. And then this week I was actually rethinking why don't we just ban everything? And then after hearing Mr. Bennett and reading his email, again, I've been rethinking it again. So I think where I am at this point, like I personally would not use consumer fireworks. I don't think they're safe. I think they're dangerous. I wouldn't trust myself with them. So, and of course, along Higgins Beach and the beach areas, there's a clear need to protect the environment and protect the endangered species. So I think where I'm landing at this point is, again, is there, I know we met last week and we talked about it a couple weeks ago and we chose Route 1. I just don't know if there's another option that we haven't really considered. Maybe looking at the zoning, it sounds like Route 77 isn't ideal, but is there something we can do besides Route 1 at this point to set that threshold? Or is there some way we can make sure those responsible citizens like Mr. Bennett don't, get like who are doing it appropriately and responsibly, it sounds like, don't get harmed negatively because of this and can still enjoy and do things responsibly. I don't really know where I sit right now on this, but it doesn't feel like this is the solution.
I'm gonna go to Dawn, Jean Marie, then Betsy, just to get Dawn a chance to jump in here. So.
Yeah, I didn't like this when it came out of committee. I liked it better since it was amended. I don't know how much time we want to spend on it. We tried to address the basic issues. We tried to take a common sense approach. We tried to, not complicate this, beyond the point it could actually be implemented. I remember reading someplace one time that given enough time, if a chimpanzee was sitting at a typewriter, the animal could probably type out the complete works of Shakespeare. So I don't know what it says about me or the council, but I thank goodness there are only 2 public hearings on this. So thank you. 1 public hearing, 2 votes. Thank you.
I think I'm ready to call the vote after that. That's perfect. Jean Marie, then Betsy.
I know. What do I say after that?
I don't know.
The reason we came up with Route 1 is not because we're trying to discriminate per se against one side of the town versus the other. I had a constituent call me up and said, why don't you use the main turnpike? Because then you won't have the high growth areas in it, where there's more close of houses and whatever. I know in my conversations with Mr. Hall, Route 1 came up because it is a clear delineation. Otherwise, you do get into you can only shoot them off on this side of Spurwink and that side of Black Point Road and this side of down at Pine Point. It's like, so just make it clean. It's easier for people to understand, which is why I wanted to go the whole town. But anyway, that being said.
We know. Councilor Gleisteen and then Councilor Clucci.
Yeah, just to concur with that. I mean, I think, John, at some discussions we talked about, a fireworks overlay zone. That's a way to do it. But then it becomes, okay, where is it? Whose is it? So.
Yeah. Councilor Clucci, then Tom, did you have something to add? I don't.
Yeah, just one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a vested interest. I don't have any interest in using fireworks. So I've really actually appreciated hearing feedback from the public on this one. And I will say it's definitely slanted towards an all-out ban. So I think this is a reasonable compromise position. Something I'm wondering, it does sound like Mr. Bennett is doing it responsibly. Is there a permit option? Where you can, if you are in the banned area, you can do it with a permit under certain conditions. I don't know. Maybe that's something we can entertain down the road. I would like to find a solution for that neighborhood, that community. I do think I want to encourage that type of bonding. And I think that's a good way to do it. But yeah, I mean, I think right now I support it. It's a good compromise position. I'm still open to amendments or changes if somebody comes with a better one.
I would just offer, I'll leave it up to you to sort through and determine where the demarcation point is, but enforcement really begins with good education. The simpler we can make this for people to understand, we stand a better chance for voluntary compliance. And so whether it's Route 1 or the Turnpike, I mean, the beauty of those is they run side to side throughout the entire community. And so it's much easier to describe. I can tell you in the early days when this was first considered, there was talk about lot sizes being the determinant or zones. It gets incredibly difficult for people to follow and to do the right thing. And so this is probably overly simple, but it's done that intentionally.
Any more? All right, well, stay with me on this one because I'm going to logically go off the path, I think. But Dawn, you hit the nail on the head. So at this point, so one thing I've learned in my short time in council, it's very difficult to govern bad behavior, right? And so I think back to last summer, we told Mr. Bailey of Bailey's Campground that he could not play music at a certain level anymore. Mr. Bailey said, thank you very much, turned his music up a little bit louder, played a little bit longer, and that was it. And then as a result, the poor guy that owns Pine Point Grill wants to have acoustic music on his patio in a little cafe. And we told that guy to take a hike. And so because we got one guy in town that dominates that area, everybody hears music and thinks it's going to be a disaster. And poor Pine Point Grill suffered because of it. Well, I'm looking at Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett is the Pine Point Grill of this situation. And I've determined that no matter what we do, the jerks are going to be jerks. I wish we had a don't be a jerk ordinance, but that wouldn't be effective because the jerks wouldn't follow it. So I don't support this as is. I have struggled with this like everybody else. I totally am in favor of somehow banning and protecting the beach areas, but I think it's far overreaching. And honestly, if I had to go complete ban or no ban, I'd leave it as is. So I would entertain if anybody has any amendments. I appreciate, Dawn, that this topic is played out, but it's frustrating to see. It's Mr. Bennett. I thought Mr. Bennett, he's a great example of somebody who's doing it right, and he's going to suffer because of it. And I think the piping plovers, and I agree with Higgins Beach. They are too old and too condensed in there to light off fireworks. Totally agree. But I have a hunch that if we did this, they're still going to be up against that problem. So that's my meandering story. Councilor, we know you want to ban all of it. Councilor,
no, I know, but I won't say that. Actually, I was going to say that if we could come up with some language, and I'm thinking if there's a neighborhood group like Mr. Bennett has, and I know there's a neighborhood group up in the Great American neighborhood, they do fireworks too, consumer fireworks, but it's a group thing that they do. If there's some way of permitting that sort of a thing, I don't know, but I mean, I'd be willing to consider something like that. So if someone has any brilliant ideas, but this just, Joe Schmo just blowing things off and the tourists coming into town down to Higgins Beach. My mother-in-law lives down at Higgins Beach, and I'm usually on Peaks Island on 4th of July, but a couple times that I've been at Higgins Beach, it's been like Beirut, Lebanon down there during the middle of the worst war. I mean, it's horrible, but anyway, there you go.
Well, we have a public hearing and a second reading, so let's vote now and take it from there. Dawn, I'm interested to see whose quote's going to get in the leader on this. Yours,
I hope it's not mine.
Or my "Don't be a jerk" ordinance.
Okay, I'll add one. If you can get people from Massachusetts to stop shooting off fireworks, you've really accomplished something.
Good. Hey, thanks, Betsy. Thanks for jumping in there with us.
There you go.
Anybody else want to say anything that won't play well in the press? No. All right, Tony, you want to call the vote?
Counselor Pucci,
Yes.
Counselor Gleifstein,
Yes, to move it forward.
yes. Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
No.
6-1, it passes to move forward.
Okay, now that the important stuff's out of the way. All right, now we have order number 21024, which is first reading and schedule a public hearing on the proposed amendments to chapter 413, the Town of Scarborough Growth Management Ordinance. This is sponsored by myself, so I will attempt to tee it up. I'll explain it. I'll bring it to the public, and then we will put it on the floor and discuss it amongst ourselves. And Tom, feel free, because I'm going to share my screen, so feel free to talk over me if I misspeak. But I'm gonna just work backwards on this because I think it's easier to understand. This is what I would like to put on the floor for discussion. And then what I would like to do is, as we speak, if people decide that we're going to remove any of these, any, all, some, none of these Roman numerals, then we can strike that from the language. So I guess when I'm in, Jay has done a good job of, and I'll get there in a second. But for instance, his scenario number 4 right here matches up with Roman numeral number 4 right here. His scenario number 3 right here matches up Roman numeral number 3 here. So I would like to put the entire thing on the floor and chop it down, so keep it as is, chop it down, or not pass it at all. But it gives us a vehicle to debate and discuss different options. And I think it might be easiest to essentially read Jay's memo, because we do have quite a few people in the audience. I think we could all use the refresher. Essentially, this is at my direction. This memo is aimed at providing amendments to the growth management ordinance to address the current lack of availability of growth permits for the remainder of this year. The backdrop of the proposed language is the knowledge that the council is considering a more comprehensive amendment to the GMO and will take shape over the next few months. The proposed amendments are intended to provide direct access to permits for projects of different scales, depending on the policy directive of council. So we have 4 scenarios here. Scenario number 1, it's the unexpected lot owner that the current language actually does address, the quote 5 reserve permits. There are currently 3 more individual owners that would qualify for those 5 reserve permits that do not have them. One of which has suggested that they're on the list because they wish to build in 2022 and wanted to be sure they have their place in line. So it could be argued there's only 2 there. Scenario number 2 is the remaining lots of mostly built out and established subdivisions. So not new subdivisions, but there are lots in mostly built out or established subdivisions. There are 2 homes in built out or established subdivisions that are waiting on permits. Scenario number 3 is lots in single family subdivisions that are currently under construction, but are fairly well built out and have occupied housing. There are 20 of those permits on the waiting list. However, the demand for these types of permits would be expected to grow as the year goes on. And scenario number 4 is lots in a single family subdivision that are approved, but not under construction at all. There are 6 such permits on the waiting list. However, the demand for these permits is expected to grow. So I would like to put this on the table, and I would essentially increase this number according to what scenario scenarios that we thought were necessary. And I know that might sound a little convoluted, but I think it's the most elegant solution as far as debating it is concerned. So before we do it, are there any members of the audience that would like to speak? Oops, that's my share screen button, sorry. Mr. Rispera, you are up.
Good evening, and thank you for giving me a chance tonight. Rocky Risborough, 287 Black Point Road. I just saw this amendment. I'm not sure how we missed it, but literally as you were speaking, I'm bringing it up on my computer, so I haven't read it very well. At a glance, I don't see how it helps the Downs with our currently approved projects. We have a multifamily project that's all approved. We're just going through the final details with staff, and we'll be in a position where we can post a letter of credit and record the plan here within the next week or two. I don't see how this amendment helps us in any way or gives us any relief in that regard. And so that's, I just want to raise the council's attention to that. Unless I'm missing something, it doesn't allow us to move forward and get permits for that subdivision that we have, as I said, all approved and got quite a lot of money in the approval process and in the ground and ready to go. And certainly market demand is there, and we'd like to be able to move forward with that. So that's my only comment at this point in time. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Cooper, you are up next.
Hi, guys. Thanks for hearing me out here this evening. So I just have one basic question, I guess. For the Wittenwood subdivision on New Road, for the Chatmoses, all the applications have been put in, and we're like, whatever the number is, 30 something on the list for 2022. My question is twofold. One is, if there are new permits available for this year, growth permits, and or if it's for next year, does it make sense that that if you make a change to the growth ordinance now, would that be retroactive as far as, say, at this point they have 6 months to be able to apply for a building permit? Would that stay the same? I mean, whether it's this year or next year that those permits become available, that they would still continue to have 6 months based on the fact that when they put these applications in, the current growth ordinance stated that they had 6 months to be able to apply for a building permit.
Mr. Cooper, I'll let the town manager answer that. So I think your question is does the 6 month rule still apply? And I believe the answer is yes. We're only, essentially all we're doing is increasing or discussing increasing the amount of reserve permits that are being issued by the code enforcement.
Right, and I'm just wondering, even with those reserve permits, if those are available to this subdivision, would they have to be tied to a building permit right away?
Yeah, so I'd say specifically to the subdivision you're speaking of, I believe that would be covered under scenario 4 in my outline. Tom, I believe that's correct. Is that correct?
Section 4 does apply to the subdivision in question. I would note on the language, the last sentence, I believe this introduces a 90-day conversion requirement.
Okay.
And Jay Chase is in attendance and the author of this. So if you wish, we could certainly invite him in.
Yeah, Tom, before we do that, let me finish public comment, Mr. Cooper, then I'll incorporate your questions into our discussion. Is that fair?
Okay. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Place, you are up.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, good evening, and thank you all for chatting on this. I bring a question to you all as really my first time going through this process. My wife and I are looking to move our family into an existing subdivision. I think the last home was built almost a decade ago in the Coulthard Farms neighborhood. We currently own the land. We have plans. We're ready to go put shovels in the ground, but we're not able to because we couldn't get a growth permit. And just as admittedly a total novice in this process, I'd appreciate comment, guidance, anything you could offer would be appreciated.
Yeah, and Mr. Place, I believe your scenario would be, it's Roman numeral number 2. So, or I should say scenario number 2. So on the lot that is part of an approved subdivision in which all of the required infrastructure and road networks are complete, the town is not holding any performance guarantee and there are no more than 2 undeveloped lots. I believe that is your situation. So what's immediately before us is if we approved that, you would get your growth permit this year. If we do not, I believe you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've probably paid a deposit and you're on a waiting list, or?
Yeah, we're on the list. Yes.
Yeah. So just to be clear, if we don't take any action, if we don't take the action for section 2 tonight, then you would still be on the waiting list for next year. If we take action on section 2, then you'd have one available to you. Tom, is that a correct statement? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, the expectation is those that are already in line for permits for 2022, if they're able to get them in the near term, they'll remove themselves. I don't know if that's true in all cases, but I expect that's true in most.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Okay, so with that, I think that's the last public comment, excuse me. So I'll take a motion again to put it as written, and then we can cut stuff out of it, would be the easiest way. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
So I guess we'll take discussion and or questions for Jay. If anyone has any questions for Jay, nobody? Councilor Clucci?
Okay, so this is a complicated situation. And I think what you brought forward is a simple short-term relief effort that I support. We've got to put some numbers and some definition around it. I certainly would be, agree with 1 to 3. I'm in favor of. It's not perfect. I'd probably also be okay with, let's release 100 growth permits into the pool and allow more to be issued through the normal processes this year. But there's downsides of doing it that way too. So I think what you brought forward is reasonable. I think it has a chance of success and it can provide some relief. And it doesn't cover all situations, like Rocky said. And I think that was intentional because I think our intent would be to work with the Downs. We have a CEA, we have an arrangement with them where we're both incentivized to make that project work. So I think I'm certainly listening and I'm open to treating that separately. But I think for the rest of Scarborough, this does a pretty good job. So thank you.
And I should just add, just to Rocky, thank you for clarifying this. This wasn't, Rocky, if you're still there, I've distributed your information to the whole council. This was for essentially Harry homeowner that's not the Down. So this, just to be clear where this was initiated. This wasn't some sort of grand fix for everything right now. Tom, did you want to add something before
just add clarity to Mr. Risbero's point? Section 7G1, which is what you're amending, is specific to single family homes. And so that's the premise from which we start. And that's why it doesn't address multifamily or other development types. That's just a constraint of the section that we're amending, if you will. So I just wanted you to be aware of why that's so.
Thank you. That was better said than me. Councilor Hamel, then Councilor Gleisten, I think. Did she have a hand up? Councilor Hamel?
Yes, thank you. Quick comment and then a question for Jay. The comment I had, I just sort of to reinforce what Councilor Clucci just said. This was intended as a short-term ad hoc measure to address, immediate concerns for folks that were, for the most part, were single family folks that were stuck in a situation where they either ran out or they didn't, they didn't know a rule applied to them. So this is a pretty specific, narrow thing. I don't think it's going to be the end of our discussion about GMO. I know it won't be. And I know that it's not going to be the end of our discussion in general about housing permits and housing affordability and so forth, the workshop that we had earlier. So that said, you don't get that impression when you read this. It's not intended to be kind of read without any sort of primer. So to that question, Jay Chase, I could not explain this to somebody on my own. Will you be available to help me explain it? And are you confident you can execute this?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Yes, we're confident we can execute this. This was written with sort of minimal policy guidance, as was stated sort of, I know Paul and Tom, I think, sort of talked about the different categories that we want to address. And so one of the things that I've heard through the conversation, and I may be answering a different question, I apologize if I am, really regarding sort of this last paragraph about those that are on, one of the things I want to, I've heard in various conversations with different counselors about the interest of tying a building permit and a growth permit together. And so I've tried to sort of weave that in here. But then recognizing that we have folks who are on the 2022 wait list, right? They sort of said, well, shoot, I better get on that wait list. And they're probably assuming they have some months anyway to get their plans put together. That's why the last sentence, I sort of put together that provision that said, okay, look, if you're sitting on that 2022 wait list, you're probably thinking you have plenty of time to work with your architect. So sort of gave a tip of the hat, if you will, sort of, and came up with the 90 days rather than what's typically allowed would be the 6 months, and certainly look for council direction on that. That was really just my attempt at trying to sort of thread the needle, if you will, in that respect. So that's how that language came to be. And so, but to your point, Mr. Hamill, yes, I think staff's comfortable. We can implement this depending on which of the 4 categories that council chooses to deliver on or not, whatever the case may be.
Thank you.
Hey, what do you mean minimal policy directive?
No. It was.
That's okay. I owe you one. I owe you one. That's all right. No.
All right. Fair enough.
Respond, Jay.
Yeah, Councilor Gleisten.
Don't take the bait.
Yeah, right. Councilor Gleisten and then Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, so I had some questions, Jay. So in scenario 1, and I know you were looking at this, how many people have a permit that have not submitted a building, have not tried to convert it at this point? I mean, so it seems like the folks, because they're in 2022, they're going to have 90 days. But if you already made it onto the list, based on the growth permits, you still have up to 6 months. So we presumably could have people that are on the 2021 list that have more time to actually complete building or get their convert to a building permit than people that are going to be affected by this should something pass. Is that accurate? That's my first question.
Yeah, I think that is probably accurate. There might be some folks, because certainly there are a number, I don't know offhand, I could certainly get the number, but I don't know how many of those of the 21 growth permits haven't yet been activated. So certainly someone who received one, say, January 20th, which was one of our last days that we had them, would have up until, what would that make, June or July to activate theirs, where presumably if this gets passed, it takes a few more readings for that to happen. It probably, actually the timeframes would probably work out about the same, but you are correct that this, okay, the way written, those that are on the wait list, the time frame was compressed, and there's no, again, if council sees fit, that certainly can be adjusted.
But are we aware of any, that are coming up on the 6 months that may not convert to permit? Is there any way we have of knowing that?
No one's informed us that they don't plan on converting. Essentially, they're one of the triggers, or one of the pieces that's in the ordinance is essentially, if they don't convert, there's a $1,500 that is a non-refundable fee when you buy your growth permit, when you submit for it. So folks would lose that. So a lot of people aren't too interested in losing money where they don't have to. But certainly I haven't heard from anyone who said, you know what, not sure if we're going to convert this or not.
Okay, so my next question is on scenario 3 and 4. So it says, however, the demand for these types of permits would be expected to grow. Can you speak to that and what that means and what you would expect? And is that based on things that you've heard or in the pipeline, people have come to you? And I guess it just gets to my last question too, is, so if we add all of these together, that's 31, I guess. And that anybody who's not on the wait list now would not be affected. Is that right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last piece? I don't.
So
think
if
I quite-
anybody who's not on the wait list currently, this would not affect them.
That depends, I guess, on how many permits council decides to fill up into the bucket. So I can't say that. Basically, as I add together the 4 scenarios, there's 40 or 41 permits that are sitting on that. Let me just see. Yep, there's about 40 to 41. Again, there's this number where one person has said they don't want to actually get theirs till 22. So if you went with all 4 scenarios of folks sitting on the wait list that are ready to activate.
Maybe I did the math wrong. 3 + 2 + 20.
Oh, no, thank you, about 30 or 31.
Yeah, I thought it was
I overstated it. Yep.
The one. So,
Yep. So
then I guess what I'm saying is the way that last subsection is written, then the 90 days would only apply to someone who's already on the wait list. So if somebody got this because we said, oh, you know what Councilor Clucci said, we're just going to throw 100 at it, it wouldn't apply to them the 90 days because they're not already on the wait list.
Right. So for those folks that aren't already on the wait list, right, let's say you throw 100 at it, again, arbitrary number.
Right.
And those who aren't on the wait list, someone else comes in, they would have to come in with their building permit at the same time they're trying to get their growth permit.
They would.
So as it would.
Okay.
They would have to come in simultaneous. That's what the
Okay,
first
gotcha.
part of the
Right,
paragraph
the
is
first
intended
part of
to.
it. Okay,
Yep.
thank you for explaining that. And then the would be expected to grow in scenario 3 and 4. Can you speak to that? Like, is this things that that are pretty concrete, or is this based on historical knowledge, or what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I guess I added that in there because we know we've heard from folks in certain subdivisions, but there are other subdivisions out there that we haven't heard from yet. And just what we typically anticipate seeing throughout a year is people come in other subdivisions that we have not yet heard from. Probably I should have put would be expected to grow under scenario 1 as well, quite frankly. It's really scenario 2 where I just have no idea how many subdivisions are out there that are pretty well established that only have 1 or less than 2 lots left. I just have no way of, without some serious digging into our files.
So I guess, my comment is, I appreciate the effort and I appreciate the ideas. We need to deal with the GMO. I think, now we've heard tonight, it's the first time I've heard, then maybe we'll deal with the downs separately because it's, I guess not just the downs. I don't want to pick on them, but because this is related specifically to single family permits and their current growth is different from that, and as well as other people in town. So it's not just about that, but that means we're going to be addressing, a lot of patchwork here. And, it just seems to me that the GMO is doing what it was designed to do. I think earlier the workshop shows that it definitely needs some change, but, I can't support it the way we're going about it, but I do appreciate the effort. And I think it's a good effort.
Thank you. Any other comments? And I guess also if somebody wants to make a motion to amend a section out or consider a number, that doesn't have to happen right now. I'm just planting the seeds to Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, I think I'm in alignment with Councilor Gleisine a little bit on this one, just from the perspective that, if we're targeting to have the GMO updated, hopefully in the next 3 months or so, shouldn't this problem be something that's addressed as we make that? So why do we need to do this one right now, as opposed to wait for the GMO to be refreshed and updated in 3 months that hopefully considers these things? Because again, just putting myself in the shoes of people building homes, like that takes a long time. So again, it just feels like we could get the GMO right consider these based on some of the conversations we just had to make sure we have the right number. And it's my understanding that as soon as we make the change with the GMO, that would retroactively impact the threshold that we've set today that's kind of causing the issue. So that would be my preference. When I look at the amendment or what's submitted, I definitely feel like 1 and 2 makes sense. 3 and 4, I think, are where I again, like, I'm like, I don't know if this is appropriate.
Thank you, John. Councilor Caterina. We lost John Clucci. Councilor Caterina.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me because my earbuds died. That's how long we've been talking, you know. They die after 3 hours. I feel very strongly that this needs to be passed now and not wait for the GMO. The GMO, if it's done correctly, is going to take us longer than 3 months. We're coming up to summer. We only meet once a month in 2 of the months of the summer. That's not to say we shouldn't be working on GMO at that point, but it's going to take a lot longer. The building season in Maine is extremely short. The frost is still not out of the ground. And when it comes out probably in 2 to 3 weeks, you know, that's prime building season. People want to get it done. I feel particularly concerned about people who don't follow what's going on. They went in thinking they get to get a building permit because there's nothing to be said. You know, how do they know that there's this list and whatnot? And we do need to address that. And as far as 3 and 4, yeah, I can live with it for now until we get the GMO in. I think this makes perfect sense. So I would definitely support this.
Councilor Hamel.
Yeah, I'm in the same place. I'm becoming more comfortable with imperfection and the fact that we can't fix everything, you know, at one time. We will evolve. This was intended as short-term measure. We responded to this with this recommendation because we were getting calls from homeowners that had builders lined up and got stuck with no building permit. So, I mean, this is a very specific thing that we're trying to address. It's going to evolve. It may be superseded by other changes, very likely will be in terms of other GMO revisions. Holding this until we revise the GMO or do something beyond that even supersedes the GMO itself, it doesn't make sense. I line up with this to support it now and move it forward and get it in place and implement it and get these people their building permits.
Councilor Clucci and then Councilor Gleisten.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got disconnected for a minute there. So if I'm repeating something somebody's already said, I apologize. But
we already voted, actually, John.
Oh, okay, never mind then. You know, I'm looking at the data Jay supplied in terms of the growth permits that have been issued for 2021, and 55 of them are for single-family homes outside of the reserve pool. Our average expectation is closer to 90 to 100. Right. So I feel fully comfortable for single family homes allowing another 40 to 50 to come on board this year. If our schools were being overwhelmed this year or next year, at risk of it next year, then I'd have a different stance. But I think the GMO did what it was designed to do, which is create a pause in the process. But now from my perspective, I'm okay releasing some because I don't think that our roads, our fire, police, schools are at risk of being overwhelmed with the development that is currently being proposed or planned. So that's where I'm at. I guess my number for, and I don't know if I'm open to discussion on this, but it would be 40 to 50 in terms of what I think we could comfortably, I could comfortably live with.
Councilor Gleisten. And then, John, I'll circle back with the numbers and the amendments in a minute. So
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to understand from people, and they don't have to comment if they don't want to, obviously, but, you know, I mean, the great thing about ordinances and policies is, you know, they're debated, they're put in place, and they apply equally. So, you know, yes, some people have been negatively impacted by this, but, you know, the town has also had many years to look at what's happening, review. I mean, we had a goal last January, a council goal a year ago, January, to review GMO. And I just, my concern is, you know, we change it now and then what about the next 50 people that come and say, I'm so impacted? Oh, well, let's do it again. I just, it doesn't feel fair to me, the way that we're talking about doing it. We're going to change an ordinance because, we haven't, quite frankly, maybe we didn't do our job well enough to make sure that we had, we had in place what we needed, based on what was happening. I think we took a stab at it. We knew it needed to be a council goal, but what's going to happen when the next 50 people come who are really impacted? We are picking, this isn't a good term, but we're kind of picking the winners and the losers here. And I think the policy's in place. I think we need to get busy on the GMO and get that work done.
Yeah, so Betsy, I actually disagree. I think this ordinance is completely unequal. I think that's why we're here. I think it's pretty clear that the developers that were in the know took every single one of the permits. So I'm doing this in response to, I don't think it's equal, right? The gentleman that spoke just earlier, he doesn't have access to the same information that Rocky, Rispera, and Chamberlain have, right? These guys live, die, breathe development, and they knew what they were doing. And so I think I'm specifically sponsoring this because I don't think this is being applied equally. I think it's actually the other way around. And to your point about what the next 50 people, I don't think the data supports there will be 50 single family houses coming up. I think it's pretty predictable how many single family houses we have. I think Clucci's data coupled with some of Jay's statements is I don't think we're in danger of 50 more single families that fit this definition coming forward. I totally think there'd be a couple more. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting it's, but that, I guess that's, you asked for what I thought. That's why.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point. I would just say they do have the access to the information. They have the planning department they can talk to. All of these ordinances are online. So I get that some people are more, sophisticated in the process maybe, but I do think it's equal access that people had. It was anything we hid or only told to certain people. So, very points well taken. I appreciate your answer.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's no comments, I guess I'm going to look for, so let me structure this way. Let's talk about scenarios 1 through 4. Does anybody want to make motions to remove scenarios? And by the way, you can make a motion to remove all of them. I'm just trying to make sure everybody has an equal chance to make motions. Councilor Gleisi.
I would like to make a motion to remove scenario 3 and 4.
Okay, perfect. That's what I was looking for. Good. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and discussion around removing scenario 3 and 4. Councilor Clucci and then Councilor Hamel.
So I mean, in the spirit of compromise, I could deal or live with removing scenario 4 because the projects haven't gotten underway yet. But for projects that are well underway, that there's a substantial investment by the developer in the infrastructure there, I just think it's punitive to not allow it. So I would support 4, but not 3.
So, John, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in here, but I wonder if Jay could say what fairly well built out means. So that is not a very exact phrase. So if I could get some clarification on that.
Sure. Should I jump in?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah. So actually I think that fairly well built out is in my memo, but the actual ordinance language tries to put more structure around that in terms of saying, I'll just read it. I think it might be up as well, but for number 3, this would be on a lot that is part of an approved subdivision in which the required infrastructure and road networks are either under construction or are complete, and there are more than 2 undeveloped lots within the subdivision. That's what's intended. So, and the reason I sort of did are under construction or complete, because there are some subdivisions that come in and build their infrastructure out and sort of get that piece out of the way, and then the houses come in. There's other projects that are sort of in phases, and so there's different. This was the really hard part about putting the language together, because in town, we have developments that are in every single stage of a project's life cycle. And so this was really intended to identify basically any, number 3 would get at a single family lot. And again, that's an important distinction that I would, was one of the policy directives that was talked about. For single family lots in any subdivision that's either, at any stage of development, whether it's fully built out or just getting started, and anywhere in that spectrum.
Thank you, Jay. So just to reiterate, Don, before I go to you, we're talking about the amendment to remove 3 and 4. So Don?
Very well. On the amendment to remove 3 and 4, I'm not in favor of removing 3. I know the individual who called about this, who was in that precise situation. So this would, and there were a handful of other folks who had issues like that got us to this point. So my preference is, and I know you probably can't roll back the clock now, but I defer to the folks that worked on this and the sponsors. That's John Clucci and yourself. To give us a recommendation, and we vote on that. The optionality here, I appreciate, but it's in my narrow little mind at this point in the evening, it's making it harder for me.
I think that's fair. Let's move the 3 and 4 conversation as fast as I can. How's that sound? Councilor Anderson, did you have your hand? You had your hand up, and then no, Councilor, no.
I didn't, but I have a comment.
All right, I'm going to go with Katarina, then you. Nope, I'm going to go
Sorry.
with you. Okay.
No, I had to unmute myself. Stop it. I can't. Well, let me put it this way. Number 4 would address the concern I know of a very small subdivision that's all approved, that's right around the corner from me. I think it's 6 lots. They've been on the market for a while, and then with this drying up, now they aren't able to sell it, and the landowner has put a lot of infrastructure, well, not infrastructure, they haven't done that yet, but permitting, getting it approved and all of that that's a substantial amount of money for people to put into something. So my question to Jay is he still around? There you are, Jay. I'm talking about Chatmas's on New Road. How many so-called subdivisions are there out there that have been approved that aren't yet under construction? And is there some way to delineate it so that it's just small and not large? Does that make sense as a question?
I can think of just offhand, and so forgive me, it's just offhand, at least one other that is in the magnitude, and again, not precise numbers, but in the magnitude of 10 to a dozen lots off the Broad Turn Road. And I would, outside of that, I would need to do some further research in past years to see if there's others that have been approved and hadn't got started.
So we're not talking about a substantial number of lots that would fall under 4?
Again, if, understanding that there's 6 in the subdivision that you're talking about, and then another subdivision of upwards, I'll say a dozen. 18 that I can think of offhand, but again, that's
right. But my point is, it's not like 50 houses or whatever. But anyway, all right. Thank you.
Tom, I think you want to add to that, and then John Anderson. Sorry.
Just as a construct of putting this together, the way to control that is with the number that needs to be inserted. So the universe we're aware of. And we've not done exhaustive research. I say that universe is defined by those that have come forward and expressed concern with not being able to get a growth permit, equals that 31. If you wanted to allow for some unforeseen, unknown, yet to come forward, you would arguably make that number slightly higher to accommodate that additional demand. We just don't absolutely know at this point.
Yeah, okay. Hold off on the number conversation because we're still on the amendment. So I want to, Councilor Anderson, did you have something to say before?
Yeah, I would like the idea of a compromise only because, again, I still feel like the GMO should be the major mechanism that we use, and with 3 and 4, not on the table. I think it gives us a mechanism to apply some pressure for us to get that moving. And my concern is if we don't have that, then it's going to continue to linger. And I just really want to make sure we prioritize it and get it done. You know, we set a goal to have it submitted, I think, to the council by June 30th. And I think we had a great workshop, but I feel like I did leave that workshop with more questions than answers and clarity on what we're going to be doing and what the next steps are. And I really feel like we need to address that, because I think we are here partially because we didn't update it last year when it needed to be. And so I just, rather than doing the patchwork that Councilor Gleistein said, I just want to use those two as a catalyst to make sure we really commit to get the GMO updated.
Any other discussions on the amendment to remove 3 and 4? Yeah, Councilor Anderson, I agree, but I also found that the more external forces we can remove, the clearer we think. So, you know, maybe this is perceived as trying to bust open the, you know, hand out growth permits for free, but it's also, you know, this is a tough conversation when we have, you know, when we're looking at a GMO, we have all these external specific scenarios coming at us. I'd rather look at, you know, not have those, so to speak, but I totally appreciate what you just said. I mean, it's, you know, you can hold our own feet to the fire, but. All right, so I'm going to call a vote on the motion to remove scenario 3 and 4.
Counselor Clucci,
No.
Counselor Gleistein,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
No.
Counselor Hamel,
No.
and Chairman Johnson.
No.
5-2, motion fails.
Okay, and before we talk about a number, which I don't want to belabor it, but I just think it's right by the process. Does anybody want to bring up a motion to remove just 4? Just because it was mentioned. I'm sorry to everybody. I'm sorry. No, okay. Council, would somebody like to bring forth a amendment with a number where it says insert here? Currently, we're at 31. Councilor Clucci. Well, sorry.
Currently we're nothing.
We're not. Yeah.
So I would motion to amend that to 50.
And just to be clear, point of question, Tom, that's actually 45 more, correct? Because this, we're overriding the way it currently reads. So when he says 50, that's actually 45 more.
Well, I believe some of those 5 have already been issued. Jay, do you?
But that's my point.
This actually is a subsection under 1. So so 1's going to stay as is, untouched.
Oh, that's good.
This is an add-on. So those 5 under 7.1 have already been issued. They're gone. Now we're adding a 7.1A, and this is only about the year 2021, at least the way it was crafted. And so.
Okay, that's a lot cleaner. Thanks, Jay. Do I have a second for the 50?
Second.
Second to 50.
Okay, discussion on the 50. Councilor Katarina.
I support that. It makes perfect sense to me, given the scenarios that we're dealing with.
Councilor Gleistein.
I could potentially support 40, not 50. 40 would get a few more if there's just some single lots somewhere. But, you know, letting another subdivision start, you know, till we get the GMO fixed, so 50 is too many for me.
Okay. Any more discussion on the 50? So just to be right by the process, well, I guess we'll vote on the 50. If it fails, we'll vote on the 40. Okay, sorry. Tody, would you like to call the vote for the 50?
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Counselor Gleistein,
No.
Counselor Anderson,
No.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
No.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
And now we are at the whole enchilada. All we've done is amend it. So I'm going to just call the.
Actually, Chairman Johnson, I'm sorry to jump in. One of the policy questions I had of council, you'll see under A1, this is those lots that we currently already addressed, right? That in the unsuspecting, as has been termed anyway, single lot owners outside of a subdivision. There was at least and forgive me if it's actually not in what was in the council package, but a statement about a minimum of some number of the total permits of the 50 would go to this classification. I don't know if council has interest in including that language or not, but I understood that at least at the outset of the conversation with different counselors to be sort of the main category that counselors were focused on, and then that grew, like things happen. So certainly if this language isn't appropriate, we can take it out, but I felt I wanted to at least provide that opportunity for discussion with council.
Yeah, Jay, I
leave
get
it
it.
at that.
And actually, thank you, because actually, Betsy, this might go to one of what was grinding your gears a little bit. If we set that minimum slightly higher, right, those can only be allocated not in subdivision. So a way to maybe compromise within ourselves, we could set that minimum to 15, 20, and those are the one-offs that aren't in subdivision. So that might be a way to get you closer to the 40, so to speak.
So we have to do that by an amendment, right?
Yeah, we have to amend that number. Yeah, we still haven't. So I guess I'm looking for a motion for the minimum number of these 50 that would be single-family homes that aren't in any subdivision whatsoever.
So make a motion, that would be 15.
Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, discussion that the minimum number of the 50 have to be non-subdivisions. Councilor Clucci.
I came to the same number. I understand it's winging it, but so we're not that far off. That's it.
Yep, I agree, Betsy. I think it's the right, I agree with the number. Councilor Johnson and then Councilor Katarina.
Yeah, I must have missed the boat somewhere because I thought when this initiative started, that's what the core of this question was. It was for the folks outside of subdivision that were coming forward to the council to build their retirement house, and they got left at the train station. So having editorialized on that, it begs the question, because I definitely want to support that part of it, is how are we dealing with the M&R holding request for 74? I know it's a different discussion, but somebody must have some thoughts on it.
It is a wholly different discussion. I have no thoughts on it whatsoever. The only thing I said was to Rocky was that I've submitted it to you guys and I've had precisely 0 discussions about it. So I have no answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a subdivision, isn't it? So if it's a subdivision, it wouldn't be covered by this. Isn't that the way this is supposed to?
No,
it's because it's multifamily. This is single family only. So this is everything
Okay,
they're doing. Yeah.
I would just observe the 15 doesn't leave you much additional. We've got 31 we're aware of. So if 15 are reserved for this class, that's 35. That doesn't give much room for others. I would just point that out to you.
No, I think that's why it's a compromise though. So,
okay.
Yeah. There's currently 2 in that category, correct?
Correct. And I guess the other observation, I wouldn't expect that we'd ever in our wildest dreams need 15 of that class, but
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is anybody waiting for that class?
2.
Okay, we're still in the discussion on 15. So is there any other thoughts on 15?
I guess I'll walk my 15 back, and 10's probably a better number then. Double what the normal allocation is.
So I think I'm gonna call a vote on 15 first, right? Because it's on the table. Because I don't think Betsy's gonna withdraw her motion. So, okay. So, are we going to limit it to section 1? Excuse me. Section 1 would be 15, which I think what Tom was saying is that would leave 35 for the other categories. So with that being said, a motion, call the vote on the 15 minimum for section 1.
Counselor Clucci,
No.
Counselor Gleifstein,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
No.
Counselor Katarina,
No.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel, Counselor Hamel,
You're muted.
Yes.
thank you, and Counselor Johnson. Chairman Johnson, so sorry.
I'm a no, sorry.
Okay, it passes.
I don't
Does it?
No.
That did not
No.
pass.
It did not pass, sorry,
Yeah,
thank
okay.
you.
I'll offer a motion to amend that number to 10.
Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Okay, Tony?
Counselor Pucci,
Yes.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
okay, Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was unanimous.
Now we're back to the main motion as amended. And before I call, I think everybody's ready to vote, but before I do, I just want to publicly line this up. First of all, just if you're in the audience, this does not mean it's approved. This is a first reading. There will be a public hearing we have a special meeting on April 7th. There'll probably be a public hearing then. And then the earliest this is going to get done is April 14th at the earliest. So just to set a reasonable expectation, it might be the 21st too, but I just want to set a reasonable expectation. If you're sitting in the audience right now, you're looking at April 14th, April 21st for this to be finished. This is not finished. So apologies. I just wanted to say it to put a level set where we are. Tody, you want to call the vote?
Counselor Pucci,
Yes.
Counselor Glystein,
No.
Counselor Anderson,
No.
Counselor Katarina,
What are we voting on?
the main
Sorry.
motion as amended.
Yes.
Okay, Counselor Johnson,
No.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
5-3, motion passes.
And I know we're towards the end of the agenda, but it is 9 p.m. Would we like a quick break? Because we have counselor comments and one more, up to you guys. Break? Yeah. We'll reconvene it. We're going to recess to 9:05. Whew. So question for you, Mr. Hamill.
Yes.
Would you like to do leadership tomorrow, or do you want to take a breather and do it like early next week? Or
I could take a breather, but I could do it tomorrow too. It's up to you,
do you
Tom.
mind if we do it like maybe Monday next week or something?
No, that'd be fine.
I would just been, like I told you, I've been covering a lot and stuff. So,
Yeah, Monday's fine. Monday's fine.
all right. So I'll send on Sunday night, I'll send something out to you guys and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I resisted my urge to quote. I was gonna say something with the fireworks. I was gonna say something along the lines of, "I feel like I'm in the movie of Footloose," but I didn't.
You're dating yourself when you do that. At least it was still a color film.
We banned music. We banned all fun things.
Grow up. I mean, come on, grow up.
It's funny how those things, you don't think you're going to give them much thought, and you end up thinking about them more than everything else. It doesn't. Okay, I'm going to break the rules a little bit and start 2 minutes early since we're all here and ready. Order number 21025 is an act to authorize the town manager to sign a new license agreement with Ryan McPherson, formerly with Abigail Carroll and None Such Oysters LLC, for the use of the south side of the town pier for the working float. Before Tom mentions this, I will say that Mr. Hamill is probably going to motion to kick this to Coastal Waters Committee. They haven't seen this yet, and we just thought it was the right thing to do. So just to foreshadow what it is, but please, by all means, we can still discuss it and we can still ask questions. But I think Mr. Hamill's expressed his desire to kick it to the committee. So with that, Tom, you want to tee it up and then we'll take questions and.
Sure. None Such Oysters, back in 2015, as I recall, they were the first entity to apply for an aquaculture license. They actually culture mussels further up in the Federal River. As part of that request or operation, they inquired about the town's support and allowing them to put a float on the inside of our fixed pier. And sure enough, the council at the time agreed and issued a license agreement to None Such Oysters. That agreement has been subsequently approved throughout the years. And most recently, the business has sold, and the new owner, I guess not surprisingly, would like the ability to use the same float to help support that on the water operation. The current license agreement does have an assignment clause, but that assignment requires consent of the town. Ergo the town council. So that's why the matter's in front of you. I've not personally had the occasion to talk to the new owner. I think Tody's had interactions with him, and he submitted a letter kind of stating his desire to have a similar arrangement for his operation.
Thank you, Tom. Let's put it on the floor and then we'll ask questions. And then actually, before I do that, anybody in the public like to speak? It doesn't look like it. So is there a motion?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Okay. Discussions and questions. Mr. Hamill, do you want to lead us off or?
Yes, I was going to suggest that we make a motion to table this in order to provide the opportunity to Coastal Waters, but also the Shellfish Committee to, discuss this and be aware of it. When this license was granted some time ago, it was to a startup operation, Abigail Carroll. The individual who's purchased that business, None Such Oysters LLC, is a very successful and very large operator. He owns at least a half a dozen other licenses and is a major harvester of oysters and also a prominent aquaculturist. So this is just really to give us, I have no interest in trying to interfere with him coming to town and being successful in the role. However, he's going to be using facilities that are covered, by the working waterfront rules, and that typically includes involvement of the coastal and shellfish committees both. So I'm interested in trying to give these guys some line of sight to this deal, which was revised in 2019. It changed substantively from the first time. It included an upweller that was stricken in the revised lease renewal. So there are some changes to terms that have occurred, number one, and number two, there have also been There are also aquaculturists who would be interested in, potentially, using that flow, or, having that integrated into the business, and or revisiting the issue of an upweller, and also seeding that, for small oysters that was stricken in terms of the terms. So also there's a matter of there's a $420 lease for this annually that dates back now 8 years. So I'm thinking that market pricing probably also stands some revision. So for those reasons, I'm interested in making a motion to table this for a month in order to give the opportunity for the committees to talk about this and to come back to the council in mid-April. So I know that's not the motion before us.
No, you can make it now if you want to, but does anybody have any questions before Don makes it? No. Okay, do you want to make it?
So I'd like to make a motion to table this for 1 month in order to provide for the opportunity to review this with coastal harbors and shellfish committees.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilor Gleisting? Second, sorry. And there's no discussion on the table. So with that, Tony?
Counselor Gleisting,
Yes.
Counselor Cloutier,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes,
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you. That was unanimous.
thank you.
Thanks, Don. Item number 9 is on action items. Number 10, raise your hand if you have a standing or special committee report. Counselor Gleisting.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So I just want to say with senior advisory, our next meeting is March 23rd. And I did mention last time that we're looking to have something in the spring. I wanted to mention quickly, and I'll formalize it more, but one of the ideas that we've discussed is kind of having an email outreach list where people could volunteer to help with a single event or maybe a recurring event. We have some limitations, with how many staff we have to run some things. And then we're looking for new ideas because some of the most popular activities are the trips, which are quite difficult in the current environment. So I'll probably be hitting you up maybe to join that email list, and perhaps it would just be a one-time thing. You would say, yeah, I'll help set up for that lunch on, for the groundbreaking for the pavilion at Memorial Park. I'm happy to do that or something. So not a big commitment. And then, hopefully we'll get other people to join that. And that might give us a little more leeway, and certainly doesn't have to be a senior, to help run some events. Rules and policies, Tom mentioned it already. There's been discussion about what do we want to look like going forward, depending on what they do with state law for recording. But in particular, I wanted to bring forward that I proposed that we, regardless of how that comes out, we do record for sure long-range planning all the time. They are a committee that is established by charter. And then Councilor Anderson had a really good point that after we pass the comp plan, it's not a given, but it was done with the last comp plan that the long range planning committee put together the action plans to translate into action from the comp plan. So I think that in my opinion, it's kind of overdue. I'm just giving you a heads up about that. And I'd like anybody, especially Jean Marie and Don, who are very involved with that committee, to kind of reach out to me so we could have some further discussion about that. And that's it.
Thank you. Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, Finance Committee is going to meet next Wednesday. We're going to continue the review of the Vesta Senior Housing CA request. In parallel, I believe the Housing Alliance is going to be reviewing their application later on that same evening. So just a heads up if anybody has any comments or feedback on that. We're also going to start discussing how we want to approach reviewing the budget. And as Tom mentioned in his report, we are shifting Tom has shifted the start date, and I'm supportive of that. I think our charter calls for us to have an audit of the previous fiscal year by December, and there's really no enforcement of that. But I think one at least this is some way we can put a line in the sand. So we're not going to start the next process until we have real numbers to create some context around. So I'm supportive of that decision. I'm glad Tom agreed as well. That's about it. John can probably cover the downtown committee. I think they're making some good progress.
Councilor Anderson.
So I'll give an update on the downtown committee. So we had a great meeting yesterday. One key thing that came out of it that will probably be more formalized as they put together the report later is really assessing the grandstand and whether it was something we wanted to keep or potentially allow to go away. And I think there was pretty good consensus among the group based on a recommendation that was provided by one of the subcommittees that having the grandstand in the downs is something that they're going to really want to see. And so I think that's just just to kind of share that with you guys, because we didn't really talk about, is it public, is it private? They weren't going to provide that type of recommendation, but it does seem like they're hoping that that could be something that anchors the downtown and keeps the history of Scarborough there. In addition, again, we talked a little bit about timeline, and while I don't think they're ready yet to come forward with an extension, it's likely at some point over the next couple of months or weeks, they might come forward with a request for an extension from their original June date. I think, one thing that's probably going to drive that a little bit is, the developers have brought on contractors to support coming forward to the committee with a better vision that they can react to. And so I think that's going to kind of determine a little bit more probably when the committee itself will be ready to provide the recommendation. So more to come on that. Other than the downtown committee, we had the rec advisory board last week. One thing, Councillor Gleistein, that was brought up or discussed that might make its way back to the senior advisory committee was a discussion around, again, kind of revisiting potentially merging the two committees at some point, or determining whether there's an opportunity to cross-represent the rec advisory board on the senior advisory committee and vice versa. So I think that's just something that might be coming down the pike. That's all I got.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, Mr. Hamill?
Yeah, I had an update. We're going to be back on track with appointments and negotiations committee with next month's meeting. Coastal Waters and Shellfish Committee, we met a week or so ago, and they're very interested in trying to tighten up the parking down there for commercial vehicles. So we expect to come back with a recommendation. We'll be working in conjunction with the harbor master, with Sergeant Thibodeau, who's been responsible for staffing down there in the summer, and both committees. And I think, it'll be a handful of what are pretty reasonable suggestions with a lot of input also from Vinnie Clow and Sue Bailey in terms of, what they'd like to see down there as well. So that'll be coming forward. And one thing that's not committee related, but I did want to mention, I had the good fortune of attending a library podcast over the weekend that are being conducted by Nancy Crowell and Bill Donovan. So it was really very informational. Now, I expected they were going to ask me to write a check at the end of it, but it was really informative in terms of where they are with the plan, what they are, how their plans have changed, and other activities and issues and needs concerning the library. So I just we'll look forward to us tracking that. I know that's going to be a big topic of discussion as part of our budget deliberations. So those are the updates.
Don, any others? No, I have a brief one. Don and I we're going to postpone leadership till Monday or Tuesday of next week, simply because this has been a long night. And so I'll report out my chair's report sometime early next week. The only other thing I think is worth mentioning is, I believe, Tom, the beacon's going to come forth. We're going to have a workshop on the 21st of April. I think we've said a few times the Beacon is looking to expand, I believe, 4 buildings, which would be an amendment to their contract zone. And then I haven't heard from the folks at Enterprise Drive. So right now, the only thing on the long range docket for those 2 projects would be the Beacon, which I think we've all known is coming for quite some time. And I think we offered him an earlier time slot, but he knows that we wanted some really specific demographic information. So to his credit, he actually postponed it himself to make sure he had everything for us. So that's all I have to report. Are there any council member comments? Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I just want to extend really an apology to the council. You know, I'm very passionate about this growth thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one, but doesn't mean that you're not. Your opinions and thoughts are definitely well respected, and I learn from them. So I do apologize, but I'd like to leave the meeting with some thought, because we all know what's coming. Risbera is going to be coming back. Rocky might still be on the call. I support the downs 150%. Okay. But before we now go ahead and address that again, just take a walk through the downs. Okay. I go there every other day. It's row after row after row of empty buildings being built, which is good. And I'm really hoping our GMO is now not an instrument to preserve jobs for a developer. That's all I've got to say.
Okay, Councillor Hamel.
Yeah, I want to build on some of Ken's comments. This has been a challenging evening. If you look at the agenda, pick any single item, deserves a meeting in its own right. So we are dealing with a volume of very complex things, and I want to thank the council for their patience and their goodwill as we're working through these. This is not easy, and it's not pretty, and I think we just need to keep at it, keep our heads down, and keep moving forward, and do the best we can to support one another as we're dealing with tough stuff ahead. So it will get easier. It will get easier at some point. But thank you.
Thanks, Don. Councillor Gleisting?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and I'm not one to normally do this, but I really appreciate Councillor Johnson's focus on the GMO. He's been very focused on it. I have learned a ton. He has pulled out history and things that I didn't understand and didn't know. And then when I think I understand it, I don't really understand it. And then I have to go back and look at it again. That has been extremely valuable to me. And, when you put so much heart and energy into something, it does get, it can get, where you feel very passionate about it and a little, and so any of that is really understandable. And I just want to really give my personal thanks to you, Ken, with everything you have put into this. It's a lot more than I think a lot of people understand or know. And it's been very valuable to me personally as a counselor.
Thank you. Councillor Clucci.
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. Councillor Johnson shared a 350-page growth management document that was done 20 years ago, and it was very thorough. And I know he's been through it with a fine-tooth comb. And I just wanted to point out, I feel like the direction we were going tonight was towards recreating something similar to that, bringing some help, or trying to tackle, go after a more robust process. And that's a little counter to delivering something in June. So that's, those two are not necessarily aligned, I guess, is what I'd just like to throw out there. But I agree. I think bringing some different viewpoints to the table helps us arrive at a better decision. And I welcome your participation.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take, actually, Anderson, did you have anything? No? I'm sorry. I totally agree. I mean, I think it's the tendency to feel like we're there's two separate processes here. It's dealing with what's in front of us, but then there's the long term, right? So, I feel like we're, as a body, we're moving in a pretty good place long term. I think there's I think a lot of people are saying a lot of the same things, right? And It's hard to tease out. I think we've all acknowledged we need help, right? We need somebody that's not us to help us articulate what we're saying. And I think that's something that's important that came out of the meeting. And there's more to this than just the pressure release valve, and there's more to it than the Respera 72 permits. There's a long-term vision that we're wrestling with. And unfortunately, we're also dealing with very short-term, very high-pressure situations. And that's obviously not ideal. So I don't think an apology was necessary. I love passion. So I'll never be offended by somebody's passion. But,
Really?
yeah, well, there's
Yeah, right.
well, he just happens to follow Robert's rules of orders, so there's a difference there. But we'll debate that at a different time.
Yeah, well, we give as good as we get, right, Paul?
Yeah, Betsy, that was actually very well played. Good job. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Tony?
Yes, Counselor Clucci,
yes.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Katerina,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
It was unanimous.